Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal M. Before we get into the stories, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. And if you've ever had a paranormal experience you can't explain, feel free to send it to me. Tonight's first story is about a boy living in a factory colony who saw something strange near a park late at night. At first, he thought it might be his imagination, but what happened later at an abandoned house made him think otherwise. So settle in, relax, and let's begin. I hope you enjoy the video and sleep well tonight. This happened sometime around 2003, when my family moved into a residential colony owned by the company where my father worked. It was one of those neighborhoods where almost every family knew one another. Most of the adults worked at the same factory, and there were children everywhere, so finding someone to play with was never difficult. Near our row of houses, there was a large rectangular park. It had an open field in the middle, a few old trees around the edges, and a pair of metal swings at the far end. During the day, it was always crowded. But after sunset, especially near those swings, the place felt strangely empty. The older children used to tell us stories about the land. According to them, there had once been a small village there. When the factory was built, several houses were demolished, and even some old burial sites were supposedly disturbed. People said the spirits of the former residents still wandered through the colony. I never really believed any of it. Every school and neighborhood seems to have a story about being built over a graveyard, so I assumed this was our version of the same old legend. Then, one summer night, something happened that changed my mind. It was around 9:30, and I was riding my bicycle after dinner. The streets were quiet, but not completely deserted. A few porch lights were still on, and I could hear televisions playing inside the houses. As I passed the park, several street dogs suddenly began howling. They were all facing the same direction, the dark end of the park. At first, I thought they had spotted another animal. I slowed down and looked through the fence, but I couldn't see anything. The field appeared completely empty. I should have gone home. Instead, curiosity got the better of me, and I continued riding along the road beside the park. When I reached the far corner, near the swings, everything became unusually still. Even the dogs had stopped making noise. Then the temperature dropped. I don't mean it became slightly cooler. It felt as though I had stepped into a freezer. The cold seemed to exist only around that one corner of the park. A powerful gust of wind rushed past me, nearly pushing my bicycle sideways. I stopped and put one foot on the ground. That was when I saw one of the swings moving. The other swing was completely still, but this one was swinging back and forth with long, heavy movements. It didn't look as though the wind was pushing it. It looked as though someone was sitting on it. I stared for a few seconds, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then I noticed the shape. There was something on the swing. It had the outline of a person, but its body was unnaturally dark, darker than the shadows around it. I couldn't see any clothing, skin, or features. Its head seemed bent at an uncomfortable angle. It was only a few meters away from me. I panicked and began pedaling. As I passed the swings, I felt something turn toward me. I could feel its attention following me, even though I hadn't seen a face. Against every sensible instinct, I looked back. The swing was empty. The figure was standing now. It was tall, crooked, and completely black. Where its face should have been, there was only a distorted patch of darkness. And it was watching me. I pedaled harder than I ever had before. I turned onto the road leading toward the neighborhood market. That street had bright lamps, so I expected the fear to disappear once I reached it. But the darkness seemed to follow me. The air felt heavy, almost thick enough to breathe. My chest tightened, and for a few moments, I felt as though something was riding directly behind me. When I finally reached the main road, the shop lights came into view. My house was only a short distance away. I remember thinking, I'm safe now. Then my vision suddenly went black. My bicycle swerved. I hit the pavement hard and slid along the road. A few seconds later, my sight returned. There was nobody around me, and the terrible pressure in the air was gone. That was my first encounter with the woman from the abandoned houses. At least, that was what I later came to believe. After the incident, I told some of the neighborhood children what I had seen. Instead of laughing, several of them became serious. Together, we began asking questions about the colony's history. Eventually, one of the older boys found an old newspaper report. It mentioned a newly married woman who had died by suicide in an employee housing block several years before our families moved there. The building was still standing, although nobody lived in it anymore. Naturally, being children with more courage than wisdom, we decided to visit it. The abandoned block was about a 15-minute bicycle ride from our homes. It contained 6 small flats, with 3 on each side of a narrow corridor. We found the building in the late morning. The walls were cracked. Weeds had grown through the pavement, and the windows were coated with dust. Behind the building stood a huge banyan tree, exactly where the newspaper report said it would be. Even in daylight, the place felt wrong. We located the flat where the woman had lived. Beside the front door was a narrow window made from cloudy glass. As we approached, I saw the shape of someone standing behind it. I assumed the sunlight was creating a strange reflection, but the figure seemed to remain still, facing us. Before we could enter the building, one of our neighbors spotted us and shouted from the road. He ordered us to leave immediately. By the time I reached home, my parents already knew where I had been. I received a long lecture and was forbidden from going near the abandoned block again. That should have been the end of it. But I couldn't stop thinking about the figure behind the glass. That evening, I persuaded my younger brother and 2 older boys from the next building to return with me. We arrived shortly after 7. The sun had already disappeared, and the abandoned complex looked far more threatening than it had in the morning. We left our bicycles near the gate and walked inside. The moment I entered the corridor, I looked toward the cloudy window. The figure was still there. Someone was standing behind the glass, staring out at us. But this time, there was no sunlight. There were no lamps inside the flat, and the entire building was dark. There should not have been enough light to create a silhouette. One of the older boys suggested that we check through the peephole. We quietly approached the door. I leaned forward and looked inside. There was nothing. The flat was completely dark and appeared to be empty. The door was secured with an old rusted padlock that looked as though it had not been opened in years. Then something slammed against the other side of the door. The impact was so powerful that the wood shook in its frame. Another blow followed. Then another. It sounded as though someone trapped inside was desperately trying to break through. We stumbled backward. At that exact moment, the door of the flat across the corridor slowly swung open on its own. None of us waited to see what was inside. We ran. My younger brother climbed onto one of the older boys' bicycles, and the 3 of them sped ahead. I jumped onto my own bicycle and followed. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps behind me. They were fast and uneven, striking the road in a rhythm that did not sound entirely human. I looked over my shoulder. The same black figure from the swings was running after me. It wasn't moving normally. Its body seemed to stretch and jerk forward with every step, yet it was gaining on me. I pedaled until my legs burned. The lights of the shopping area were less than 100 meters ahead when my bicycle chain snapped. The pedals spun uselessly. I lost control and crashed onto the road. When I looked up, the figure was only a few steps away. I abandoned the bicycle and ran toward the shops, shouting for help. Several men standing outside a small barber shop noticed me. They rushed into the road, and the moment they reached me, the strange pressure disappeared. The figure was gone. One of the men helped repair the chain enough for me to walk the bicycle home. When I arrived, my brother and the two older boys were already there. They were terrified but unharmed. I told them what had followed me. Nobody questioned my story. That night, the four of us made a promise never to return to the abandoned building after sunset. And we kept it. Even now, whenever I hear the slow creak of an empty swing, I remember that dark figure standing beneath the trees, watching, waiting, as though it knew I would eventually come looking for it again. This started about 3 weeks ago, when I began having the same kind of sleep paralysis almost every night. Each time, something would enter my bedroom, pretending to be my mother. It looked like her, sounded like her, and behaved just convincingly enough to fool me for a little while. But the moment I noticed something was wrong, the dream would turn terrifying. The first night, I heard 3 soft knocks on my bedroom door. Then I heard my mother's voice asking, very gently, if she could come inside. I had just come out of a disturbing lucid dream, so I honestly believed I was awake. I told her she could come in. I was shaken and emotionally exhausted, and when she walked over to my bed, I asked her to hug me. She wrapped her arms around me, kissed my forehead several times, and asked me to kiss her back. At first, it felt comforting. Then her grip became tighter. She squeezed me so hard that I couldn't breathe. It felt as though my chest was being crushed beneath her arms. That was the moment I realized that whatever was holding me wasn't my mother. Afterward, I couldn't stop wondering whether I had somehow invited it into my dreams when I gave it permission to enter the room. It reminded me of those old stories where a creature cannot cross a doorway unless someone welcomes it inside. On the second night, I became lucid almost immediately. This time, I pretended I still believed it was really her. I controlled my expression and tried not to react, hoping it wouldn't realize I knew the truth. We were standing near the far corner of my bedroom, beside the dresser. It spoke calmly, almost casually, about wanting to remove my hands and arms. The way it said something so horrifying in such a peaceful voice was somehow worse than if it had screamed. I managed to force myself awake before it realized I was pretending. The third night began with what seemed like an ordinary childhood memory. I was sitting beside my mother, showing her one of the video games I used to love. She listened patiently while I explained everything, smiling whenever I became excited. I rested against her shoulder, and for a while, I felt completely safe. It reminded me of a time in my life that I missed deeply. Then the awareness returned. I realized I was dreaming, and the warmth disappeared instantly. Her hands closed around my throat. On the fourth night, I decided that I wouldn't open my eyes at all. I thought that if I refused to look at it, maybe it wouldn't be able to reach me. But as I began drifting out of the dream and back into consciousness, I heard laughter beside my bed. It wasn't my mother's voice anymore. It was low, harsh, and unmistakably male. I could feel a heavy presence pressing over my entire body. Even as the room slowly became real again, the feeling stayed with me, fading only a little at a time. When I finally woke completely, I wanted to cry. The next morning, I told my mother what had been happening. She felt terrible for me, but then she told me something I had never heard before. When she was younger, she had experienced something similar during college. She never saw a figure clearly, but she often heard laughter and felt a presence hovering over her. In her dreams, it would try to lift her from the bed or take control of her body. This continued for several months. She said the experiences finally stopped when she began firmly commanding the presence to leave in the name of Jesus. So on the fifth night, I followed her advice. The moment I sensed something entering the room, I spoke clearly in my mind. Anything evil in this place must leave in the name of Jesus, and it may never return. After that night, it was gone. I haven't seen it since. I've experienced sleep paralysis before, but this felt different. It was clearer, heavier, and far more personal. It didn't feel like fear creating an image. It felt like there was an intelligence behind it, something watching me and changing its behavior whenever I became aware of it. I still don't know what I believe happened. Maybe it was an unusually vivid form of sleep paralysis. Maybe my mind created a mimic from familiar memories and fears. Or maybe it was something I don't fully understand. All I know is that, for those 5 nights, it felt completely real. Hey there. I want to share some experiences with you. Moments that really unsettled me. Moments that I still think about, especially when the house is quiet and the night stretches long. It's about those times when the ordinary twists into something unexplainable. So settle in, and I'll tell you everything, just like it happened. First off, there were these growls. Not the kind you hear from a dog or a wild animal, but low, guttural growls that sent chills down my spine. You know, the kind of growling that makes your skin crawl, because it feels like something demonic is lurking nearby. I've always had this sense that growling like that is a warning. Something supernatural, maybe. And honestly, that's not a feeling I ever want to experience in real life. But here's the thing. The growling never escalated. It never turned into anything more violent or terrifying. So I'm left wondering if it was really demonic or just some weird, unexplained noise. The first time it happened, I was so rattled I went straight downstairs to tell my mom. And you know what she said? She asked if I'd been messing around with a Ouija board. Can you believe that? Like, no, Mom, I'm not that dumb. I mean, I get it, she was trying to make sense of it, but come on, I'm not playing with anything like that. Oh, and about the TV turning on by itself. Yeah, it's an old TV, so maybe it's just a technical glitch. But here's the creepy part. It always happened at around 3 a.m. Every single time. I know old electronics can act up, but the timing? That felt way too precise to be a coincidence. Now let me tell you about the scariest sleep paralysis I've ever had. This was back when I was spending my summer vacations at my grandma and aunt's house, so I must have been around 15 or 16. I was crashing on the living room couch, and it was early, maybe around 5 a.m. I remember the soft creaks of the house waking up as my grandma and aunt left for work. The door shutting behind them was the last thing I heard before drifting back to sleep, with Kiki, my grandma's little chihuahua, curled up right behind my arm. Then came the paralysis. If you've never experienced it, it's this terrifying state where your body just won't move, but your mind is wide awake, trapped inside. And in those moments, I heard the door open again. But here's the catch. I couldn't see the door from where I was lying. It was just out of my line of sight. At first, I thought maybe they forgot something and had come back. I tried to call out, to ask for help, but no sound came out. Then the voice started. It wasn't my grandma or aunt. It was something else. It spoke fast, like it was in a rush, and the voice was this weird, high-pitched male voice that buzzed with an almost manic energy. I didn't catch all the words, but one chilling phrase it repeated over and over was, "I'm coming. I'm coming to get you. Here I come." The footsteps followed, slow but steady, getting closer and closer. I couldn't see anything. Remember, the path and door were hidden from me. But the sound grew louder, right near the end of the couch, close to where my head was resting. Then, right over my head, that voice whispered, "Here I am." and kept rattling off those fast, eerie words. I was trying so hard to break free. I wiggled my toes like I'd heard that helps, but nothing. Panic started to claw at me. Then I felt something warm on my side, and I remembered Kiki was there. I tried again, this time barely managing a faint whisper, calling her name. And thank goodness, she jerked her head up, alert. That little movement, that tiny spark, was enough to snap me out of the paralysis. I sat up immediately, heart pounding, eyes searching the spot where that voice had seemed to come from. Then I just hugged Kiki and told her how much I loved her for saving me. She was such a brave little dog. Sadly, this year we had to say goodbye to Kiki. She had so many health problems near the end, but she lived a long, happy life, and she was loved so much. I still remember when she was just a tiny, playful puppy. Rest in peace, sweet Kiki. Now, to lighten things up a bit, I have to tell you about my weirdest and, honestly, kind of funny sleep paralysis experience. One night, I opened my eyes during paralysis and saw this glowing, floating head. And not just any head. It was Harry Potter's. Yeah, Harry Potter, right there, just hovering in front of me. I wasn't in the mood to fight any nightmare that night, so I whispered to floating Harry, asking, "How many monsters will there be?" I wanted to be prepared for what was coming. Harry's glowing face looked at me and said simply, "Many." I thanked him and closed my eyes, ready to face whatever nightmare awaited. But guess what? Harry lied. There was only one monster, a demon girl chasing me. Still, it was kind of comforting to have Harry Potter there, even if just for a moment. So yeah, that's my story. Strange growls, creepy voices, a heroic little dog, and a magical floating head. Nighttime can be a wild place when your mind doesn't want to rest. Thanks for listening. I hope you don't have to deal with anything like this in your own nights, but if you do, just remember, sometimes even the smallest things, like a little dog's nudge, can save you. Hey, I want to share something deeply personal with you, something that's been a part of my life for the last 8 months. It's about my mother. She passed away. She took her own life, and while it's so hard to say out loud, I have to admit, somehow I saw it coming. Not exactly when, but the fact that it might happen. She was 44 when it happened, and it's something that haunted our family for years because her identical twin sister had done the same thing 10 years earlier. It's been one of the most difficult chapters in my life. Both my mom and her sister struggled with mental illness, and they also had what's called pseudo-seizures, or psychogenic non-epileptic seizures. So they weren't just identical twins in how they looked, they were almost mirror images in their health struggles too. I still remember the night my aunt passed away back in 2009. The night before, I had this terrible nightmare. Something just felt off, like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. I knew, deep down, that my aunt was reaching out to us somehow. She was 2 hours away, and she was suicidal. The hospital was taking her seriously, but we just couldn't afford to get there. After she died, something strange happened to me. It was late, really late, and I'd just woken up from a nightmare, one filled with memories of the tension between my aunt and mom over the years. I got up quietly, trying not to wake anyone, and I headed to the bathroom to get a glass of water. I kept the lights off, using only the soft glow of my phone to guide me. As I stepped out of my room, I glanced down the hallway and saw a figure standing there. At first, I thought it must be my mom. She sometimes sleepwalked or just couldn't sleep because of her own nightmares. But no, it wasn't her. And it couldn't have been my dad either, because I could hear him snoring softly in the room next door. So I turned on the hallway light, hoping to catch a better look. But the figure was gone. No one there, No shadow, nothing that looked like a person in the dim light spilling in from the patio door. We lived on the third floor of a secure apartment building, so it couldn't have been someone outside on the balcony. I was freaked out, honestly, but tried to brush it off as a trick of my imagination. Then odd things would happen. My stuff would go missing and then show up in strange places. I still thought it was just my mind playing games, but eventually, those experiences calmed down once I moved out of their place. In the months before my mom's death, I started having dreams, really vivid, unsettling dreams, about something terrible happening to her, and then to my dad. I lived across the country from them at the time, and one of my biggest fears was that something would happen and I wouldn't be there for either of them. I'm their only child, after all. The dreams grew more frequent and intense the week before she died. They showed her taking her own life, and my dad having a heart attack and passing away too. I wanted to stay in better touch, but I was working full-time at a retirement center, and after long shifts, all I could do was collapse into bed, drained and barely able to talk to anyone. On the morning she died, I woke from a nightmare that felt so real it shook me. I got ready for work, thinking about calling her during my break to check in. Then, as I stood in the bathroom, I heard 3 firm knocks. 3 sharp raps that felt like they traveled right from my throat down to my lower back. In our family, there's this old superstition. 3 knocks means someone you know has passed away. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was probably about one of the residents at work, since many were quite old and some were very sick. But the feeling lingered. As I walked to work, I put on my headphones, hoping music would help shake the heaviness. The songs that played were from a playlist my mom and I used to listen to growing up, and it felt like she was right there with me. When I got home from my break, I received a call from my dad. Every time he called, I held my breath after saying, "Hey, Dad," because I never knew what news he would bring. He had called before to tell me Mom had tried to hurt herself, was back in the psych ward, and that things were unstable. But this time, it was different. It's all a blur now, but I remember 2 things clearly. I heard my dad cry, and my cousin, who's usually pretty closed off, hugged me. I actually had to force him into it. I flew back to my parents' province with my aunt and my cat. I quit my job. I just couldn't leave my dad alone. I didn't want to move in with my dad right away, not in the house where my mom died. So, I stayed at a friend's place until I felt strong enough to be there. About a week after Mom passed, the same eerie thing happened that had happened after my aunt died. I woke from a nightmare again, needing to use the bathroom, and once more, there was a dark figure standing in the hallway. This time, there was no shape, just a shadowy presence. My friend was asleep down the hall, so I knew it wasn't them. I turned on my phone's flashlight, but the figure vanished. I hurried through my business and went back to bed, heart pounding. Not long after, my dad received my mom's ashes. They lost her anklet, which had belonged to my uncle before he passed away. It was a little piece of family history that went missing. One evening, we were having supper when I suddenly heard my mom's voice call my dad's name from her old bedroom, where the ashes were kept. It was the voice she had when she was having a seizure, soft, trembling. The house was so quiet, no TV or radio, no open windows or doors. We were just sitting there, talking, and then silence fell before I heard it. I didn't ask my dad if he heard it too. I was shaken, but I didn't want to let it scare me away. I kept visiting. A few months later, I moved in with my dad, taking over my mom's old room, which was right next to the bathroom where she had taken her life. After that, the dreams got worse, and I started to dread sleeping or even being in the house. Then my dad suffered heart failure. I almost lost him. But he's a smart man. He recognized the signs and managed to get himself into the house and down to his room where he hooked himself up to his CPAP machine. It helped enough for him to call 911. I was so relieved. While he was in the hospital, I heard noises coming from my mom's bedroom and the bathroom. The most terrifying was hearing her crying in the middle of the night from the bathroom. Then, months later, I heard her call my name in that same seizure voice again. I wasn't alone. I had my uncle visiting at the time, and he heard it too. Since then, things have started disappearing and turning up in the strangest places. My dad has also experienced some unexplained things. I really don't know what to do with all of this. But honestly, it feels like my mom, always the one to tease and torment, she might be reaching out in her own way, messing with me just like she always did. Thanks for listening to my story. It's hard, but sharing it helps me hold on to the pieces of her that are still here, in the quiet moments and the echoes of her silence. You know, this story takes me all the way back to when I was just about 4 or 5 years old. We lived in this small trailer down in Louisiana. It had that quiet, sleepy kind of feel that only the South can have at night. I shared a bunk bed, but it was a bit different from the usual. There was no headboard, and the bed was actually set about a foot away from the wall. It was a strange setup, but that's how it was. One night, I was fast asleep, wrapped up in whatever little dreams a kid that age might have. Then, out of nowhere, something tapped my head. Not gently, but like a solid knock, like when you knock on a door. It startled me awake instantly. I remember the sharp sting, almost like the burn you'd get from a noogie, that rough rubbing on the skin. It was odd and painful. I bolted upright in bed, my tiny hands running to rub the spot that had just hurt me. I looked around, blinked into the dim room, but I saw nothing. Just silence and shadows. That didn't make any sense, though. How could something hit me while I was asleep? Then, slowly, I turned my head toward the gap between my bed and the wall, the very space where that wooden frame left a chasm. And there it was. A hand. But not just any hand. It was rotting, decaying, with holes in the flesh where you could see straight through to the bones underneath. It was grotesque, like something out of a nightmare. The flesh hung loose and wrinkled, and it was retreating slowly under my bed. My heart pounded like a drum. I didn't hesitate. I jumped out of bed, making sure to land just far enough from where that hand could reach me. I ran as fast as my little legs could carry me across the trailer to my mom's room. She always kept her doors shut and locked at night. I started pounding on those double doors, begging for help, my voice cracking with fear. Every time I glanced back towards my room's entrance, I was terrified but relieved not to see that hand, or whatever it belonged to, coming after me. But the fear was thick in the air. Minutes felt like hours before my mom finally opened the door. I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was something like, "There's a monster!" She scooped me up in her arms because I refused to go back. But she insisted, and we returned to my room together. She made a show of looking around, checking every corner, even under the bed, despite my protests. She wanted me to see there was nothing there. She told me it was all in my imagination and urged me to rest. But I couldn't. I refused to sleep in that room again for a long time. Eventually, I was forced to, but the fear never truly left. Then, about 6 months later, something else happened. I was ripped from deep sleep again, but this time, there was no pain, just this overwhelming sense of dread, like the air itself was thickening around me. I'm usually such a heavy sleeper. Nothing wakes me up easily. But that night, something was terribly wrong. I sat up, eyes darting around the room. And then, in this little nook by my closet, something started to take shape. It was like TV static, you know? That fuzzy, crackling noise and image you see on an untuned screen. It began to form a mass, and from that mass, Limbs started to sprout, reaching out like fingers. Fear ripped through me like a storm. Without thinking, I leapt up and dashed past it, heading straight for my mom's room again. I pounded on those doors harder than before, tears streaming down my cheeks. This time, it felt so much more real, more primal. As I kept pounding, I glanced back down the trailer towards my room's entrance. And there it was. This figure, made of that same TV static, emerged, peeking at me before retreating back into the shadows. It appeared again, watching me from the doorway, then slipped back inside my room. Finally, it came back, standing right at the entrance, staring directly at me with no face, no features, just a shifting body of static. I felt its gaze like a physical weight, like a starving bear eyeing its prey. The hunger it carried was terrifying, raw, and it seeped into my bones. It started moving toward me, not walking or running, but sliding forward in this slow, mechanical way, like it was on a conveyor belt. As it got closer, it sped up, and my cries grew louder and more desperate. When it was barely inches from my face, I turned from pounding on the door and leaned my back against it, bracing myself. Just then, my mom opened the door. I stumbled back, and as I fell, I saw that thing, like a bubble, pop and vanish into thin air. It was there one moment and gone the next. My mom tried to explain it all away just like before. She still tries to, even now. But I know what I saw and felt. I know that was pure evil, pure terror. Sometimes, when I tried to sleep after that, my whole bed would feel like it was spinning. Nightmares haunted me relentlessly. Now, some might say it was all just nightmares or sleep paralysis. But here's the thing. With sleep paralysis or hypnosis, you can't move. You're frozen. But I wasn't. I jumped up. I ran. I screamed for help. I was awake, moving, and terrified. So I can't just write it off as a bad dream. No, that was something else entirely. Something dark and real. Something I hope no one else ever has to face. Hey there. I want to share a story that's close to my heart. Something about my little boy and his imaginary friend. Now, this isn't some old tale. It's pretty recent, and it all revolves around a house that's been in my family for generations. You see, I live in my great-grandmother's house. She passed away about 3 years before I was born, and her name was Elizabeth. Everyone in the family lovingly called her Lizzie. It's a big old house filled with memories, creaky floors, and a quiet kind of magic that you just feel when you walk through the rooms. My son, who was born in 2009, started talking and playing like any toddler would. But something curious happened when he was just a little guy, maybe 2 or so. He began talking to someone, or something, who wasn't there to the rest of us. It wasn't just the usual babble of a kid imagining friends. It was different. He'd giggle and say, "Lily, sing it again," with this pure, bright joy that made me smile, but also stir a little unease inside. One morning, I came home from a long night shift, exhausted and barely keeping my eyes open. My son was sitting in his high chair, happily munching on his breakfast cereal while cartoons played on the TV. My dad was in the next room, probably reading the paper. Then I heard my son chatting away, really carrying on with someone I couldn't see. He said, "Lily, my mama is home. Tell her the song." That caught my attention. I asked, "What song, sweetheart?" And then he began to sing, clear as day, "Jesus Loves Me." Now here's the thing. I never taught him that song, nor did I ever sing it to him. I figured maybe one of his grandparents had. So I settled down beside him, half dozing because of my tiredness, and listened as he explained to his friend Lily who the Bubble Guppies were. laughing and answering imaginary questions. It was innocent, but it started to give me a little chill. Curious, I asked him, "Who exactly is Lily?" expecting maybe it was a character from one of his cartoons. But he looked right at me and said, "No, Mama, my Lily is my friend. She's a condom's friend. I just love my Lily, and she loves me, and she loves you, and she loves my Meemaw the Great," which is what he called my grandma. "And she loves my Shug," that's what he calls my mom. I thought maybe he'd picked up something from TV or had overheard a conversation. A few days later, I was at my grandma's house for lunch, flipping through some old photo albums when my son climbed up into my lap, eager to look at the pictures with us. As we flipped through the pages, he suddenly stopped, his little finger landing on one particular photo. His eyes lit up, and he exclaimed, "Mama, that's her. That's my Lily. Ain't she a pretty grandma?" I looked closer and realized it was a picture of my great-grandmother Elizabeth, Lizzie. I was stunned. I told my family about this mysterious Lily, and my son went on to share that his Lily told him stories, talked about her own children, sang songs to him, and watched him play. My grandma asked what songs she sang, and without hesitation, my son happily started singing "Jesus Loves Me," and then a toddler version of "She'll Be Coming Round the Mountain." Now, I never sang those songs to him. I mostly sang Beatles tunes, especially Yellow Submarine, to lull him to sleep. So hearing him sing those songs was both beautiful and eerie. We were all silent for a moment, touched and amazed by the connection. Then he said something that made us all laugh and feel a little warmth. "Mama, Lily loves all of us very much. She's a very proud grandma and is happy we live here with her. But she said you need to learn to cook better and make me a chocolate cake like Meemaw the Great." That was a sweet reminder. My grandmother's chocolate-layered cakes, made completely from scratch, are legendary in our family, a recipe passed down from Elizabeth herself. Years have passed, and I still live in that same house, the one Lizzie called home. There are little things that happen, lights turning off if I forget, doors closing softly behind me, and sometimes waking up to the heat kicking on even when it feels unnecessary. It's like our Lily is still watching over us, making sure everything's just right. We're happy here, and I truly believe our Lily takes great care of our family. It's a comforting presence, a gentle reminder of the love that transcends time. So, that's the story of my son's imaginary friend, Lily, an invisible grandma with a song in her heart and a chocolate cake recipe to share. You know, it's funny how some moments in your life just stick with you, even when you try to move past them. 11 years ago, my brother and I had one of those moments. Something so strange and unexplainable that it still lingers in my mind like a shadow I can't quite shake. And I say this as someone who doesn't easily believe in ghosts, demons, or alien encounters. I'm a skeptic by nature, but this experience, it rattled me more than anything else. So picture this. I was about 11 years old, and my family was gathered at my grandparents' estate out in the Nevada desert. It was one of those warm, quiet evenings where the backyard was filled with the smell of barbecue, my grandma bustling inside making her famous salad, and my parents chatting over wine with my aunt and uncle in the living room. It was a perfect family night, calm and cozy. But what I remember most clearly is what happened outside. My brother and I had been playing in the front yard, just two kids letting our imaginations run wild, inventing silly games to pass the time. Eventually, we got tired and flopped down together on the curb along the street to just talk. No toys, no distractions, just the cool desert air wrapping around us. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the desert was settling into that soft, peaceful quiet you get after dark. No cars, no noises except a gentle breeze rustling the palm trees overhead. It was a perfect, tranquil moment. I don't remember exactly how long we sat there, just soaking in the calm. But then my brother suddenly pointed up to the left, his voice cutting through the silence. And above the neighborhood, right across the street, maybe 30 or 50 feet up, there were two enormous white lights hovering. Not just lights on a drone or a street lamp, these were huge, glowing orbs, floating silently and slowly moving from left to right across our view. What made it so eerie was how quiet they were. No hum, no buzz, just absolute silence. And they weren't attached to anything. No visible craft, no balloons, no wires, nothing. Just these two massive lights drifting in the air, moving almost deliberately. Then they started to separate a little, as if whatever these lights were was turning to look directly at us. And suddenly, the brightness shot up so intensely that it was almost blinding. I remember thinking, how is no one else inside noticing this? The glow was like nothing I'd ever seen, like those blinding drones in a video game I'd played, but even bigger and more intense. Yet somehow, we could still see the houses and street around us. We just sat there, frozen. I can't tell you how long it lasted. Maybe a minute, maybe longer. But I was completely unsettled, and my brother felt it too. We didn't even look at each other. We just stared back at those lights, caught in this strange silence. And then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the lights slowly turned away and drifted out of sight behind the houses. It was like watching a ghost fade into the night. My heart was pounding, and I let out a nervous laugh, trying to mask my fear. My brother was more straightforward. He looked at me with wide eyes and quietly asked if we could go back inside. I nodded. We tried telling our parents what we saw, but as you might expect, they didn't believe us. My grandma even went out into the driveway to see if she could spot anything, but of course, she didn't see a thing. She suggested it might have been a helicopter from the hospital nearby. But here's the thing, helicopters make noise, and if a chopper had been hovering just 50 feet from the house, everyone would have heard it and probably ran outside. Plus, these lights weren't attached to anything. No craft, no blades, just floating spheres of light moving on their own. It's like nothing I've ever heard of or seen before. Years ago, I tried to make sense of it online. Someone mentioned skinwalkers, which seemed to fit the area, but glowing silent orbs? That just didn't match what I experienced. And the alien explanation? I want to believe there's more out there, but I'm still skeptical that this was some kind of extraterrestrial event. Maybe it was secret military tech. After all, we're just a few hours from Area 51. But even then, the logistics of what we saw boggle my mind. Imagine two enormous orbs of light, as big as cars, perfectly silent, moving in sync like one entity. It would require some serious technology. Drones capable of lifting massive lights, staying completely soundless, and coordinating flawlessly. For what? Why hover over a random neighborhood? The whole thing feels like a puzzle with missing pieces. I even recall watching a video on YouTube when I was about 14 that showed something almost identical to what we saw out there. I don't know why, but I never saved the link, and now it's lost. That video was my go-to way of explaining this to people. Losing it just adds another layer of frustration to a story that's already so hard to tell. So yeah, that night in the desert, with those silent, glowing lights drifting above the neighborhood, remains one of the most mysterious and haunting experiences of my life. And even now, when I close my eyes, I can still see those lights, bright and silent, watching us from the night sky. It's a memory I carry with me, a reminder that some things just don't have easy answers. believe something is making me sick. I don't know exactly what it is, and I don't expect everyone to believe me. But if you're hearing this because you've experienced something similar, please understand that I'm just as confused and frightened as you might be. It started with things I thought were ghosts. At first, I would catch strange shapes moving at the edge of my vision. Sometimes they looked like insects, birds, animals, or even people. Eventually, I stopped thinking of them as ghosts. They seemed more like creatures hiding in plain sight, blending so closely with ordinary life that most people would never notice them. I searched online for explanations. I found stories about shadow figures, light beings, dark entities, and people who claim to have experienced similar things. But I also found medical explanations: eye floaters, muscle spasms, allergies, vitamin deficiencies, autoimmune conditions, and disorders that can make someone feel as though invisible organisms are living on or inside their body. The medical descriptions matched many of my symptoms. I felt crawling sensations, tingling, pressure, soreness, swelling, and movement beneath my skin. To me, it felt as though invisible creatures were causing it. The websites told me to see a doctor, so eventually I did. I have never liked hospitals, but my family became worried and insisted that I stay for observation. After several tests, the doctor told me that my vitamin B12 level was very low. They believed the deficiency could be affecting my senses and causing me to hear or see things that weren't there. I spent another week receiving supplements. When I went home, I was told to improve my diet and eat more foods containing B12. I followed the instructions because I desperately wanted everything to return to normal. But it didn't. The experiences became more intense. I began hearing voices even when nobody was nearby. Sometimes they sounded almost like birds chirping, except the sounds seemed to form words and complete sentences. At other times, I thought I saw people or vehicles vanish in front of me. I knew they weren't truly disappearing. It felt more like something was interfering with my vision, creating false images between me and the world. I started imagining a clear, fluid-like sphere surrounding my body. It seemed to shimmer in the light, and I believed it was made from countless tiny creatures. Because they appeared ghost-like and seemed to drain my health, I began calling them phantom parasites. That was the name I wrote in my notes. Every day, I recorded what I saw and felt on my phone and in several notebooks. I wrote about their shapes, their movements, the sensations on my skin, and the way they appeared to gather around people and animals. Sometimes I believed they could join together and form the shapes of insects or small creatures. Other times, it seemed as though they were controlling real insects. I couldn't prove any of this, but in those moments it felt completely real to me. The strangest experiences involved light. I saw shadows bend, images flicker, and tiny black figures rush toward the corners of my eyes. They seemed to follow wherever I looked. I also noticed that these figures moved through narrow spaces and around solid objects in ways I couldn't understand. I tried to find a scientific explanation and became interested in cold plasma. I wondered whether some unknown form of life could exist in a state like that, even though everything I read said such a thing was extremely unlikely. Once, after building up static electricity, I touched my skin and saw a brief flash. For a few seconds, I thought I could see the creatures glowing before they disappeared again. I began repeating this experiment, convinced that the shock was forcing them to release their grip on me. Looking back, I understand that exhaustion, fear, and expectation may have influenced what I saw. At the time, though, it felt like proof. Sleep became frightening too. During episodes of sleep paralysis, I felt as though something had taken control of my body. One night, while walking home exhausted, I blinked and suddenly found myself much farther down the street than I remembered. I may simply have been half asleep or lost track of time, but the experience terrified me. I started believing the phantom parasites were slowly possessing me. I even compared them to a kind of cancer, something feeding on people without killing them immediately. I'm not a doctor, and I know that researching symptoms online can lead a frightened person toward the darkest explanations. Still, I couldn't stop searching. One phrase I found was ghost parasites. Reading those words made everything feel more real, even though I couldn't find reliable evidence that such organisms existed. Around that time, I noticed changes in my body. My muscles seemed smaller, my skin looked red and swollen, and I felt sore for no clear reason. I began exercising, eating better, and taking the supplements prescribed by the doctor. Some of the physical symptoms improved, but the strange sensations never completely disappeared. I still don't know what happened to me. Part of me remains convinced that I encountered something hidden and dangerous. Another part of me wonders whether my body and mind were reacting to illness, stress, exhaustion, or fear. That uncertainty is the hardest part. I'm sharing this because keeping it all inside made me feel more alone. But I've also learned that I shouldn't face these experiences by myself. When something feels real enough to frighten me or affect my health, I need support from people I trust and from medical professionals who are willing to listen carefully. Maybe one day I'll understand what I experienced. Until then, I'm trying to stay grounded, look after my body, and remember that being afraid doesn't mean I have to face that fear alone. This happened about 16 years ago, when I was around 11 years old. I grew up in Nevada, and that summer my family and I traveled to Hermosillo, Mexico, to visit relatives. A few days into the trip, someone suggested going to the coast, and before long, it had turned into a full family outing. We packed ourselves into an SUV and drove to a quiet beach town called Bahia de Quino. We rented a small house near the water, spent a couple of days swimming, eating together, and enjoying the sea, then started the drive back to Hermosillo. There were 8 of us in the SUV. My uncle was driving, my aunt sat beside him, and the rest of us were squeezed into the back with bags, blankets, and leftover food from the trip. About halfway through the drive, the SUV suddenly gave out. The engine made a rough coughing sound, then died completely. My uncle pulled onto the shoulder and lifted the hood, but none of us had any idea what was wrong. Back then, cell service along that road was unreliable. One of my relatives decided to walk ahead and search for a signal while my uncle stayed with the vehicle. The rest of us sat near the roadside, trying to find whatever shade we could. The Sonoran heat was relentless. Even the wind felt hot. After a while, we noticed someone walking toward us from the desert. He was an elderly man, probably in his 70s. He wore faded jeans, a pale checkered shirt, worn leather boots, and a straw hat that shaded most of his face. He walked slowly, with the careful steps of someone who had spent his whole life working outdoors. When he reached us, he quietly explained that he lived nearby. He invited us to rest at his home and offered us water and coffee while we waited for help. Nothing about him felt threatening. He seemed gentle, almost grandfatherly, and hospitality like that wasn't unusual in the area. So we followed him. His home was about a 10-minute walk from the road. It was a tiny, weathered structure made from pieces of wood, cardboard, and corrugated metal. Beside it stood a shaded area supported by several metal poles, with an old cloth stretched across the top. We never went inside the house. Instead, we sat beneath the shade while the old man brought us water and made coffee over a small outdoor fire. He didn't have much, but he shared everything he could. We stayed there for several hours. I remember how peaceful it felt once the worst of the afternoon heat faded. The desert slowly changed color as the sun went down. The sky turned orange, then pink and violet, and the cactus shadows stretched across the ground. The old man spoke softly with my family. He told us a little about the land and the animals that passed through the area. I don't remember every word he said, but I remember feeling safe. There was only one strange thing. He never really looked directly at us. Whenever someone spoke to him, he would stare into his cup, glance toward the desert, or lower his head beneath the brim of his hat. At the time, I assumed he was simply shy. Eventually, we heard my uncle calling from the road. Other relatives had arrived in another vehicle to pick us up. We thanked the old man again and again. He gave a small nod, still avoiding our eyes, and watched from beneath the shade as we walked away. When we reached the SUV, we told everyone about him. We described the little house, the coffee, and how kind he had been to us. The following morning, my uncle returned with a tow truck driver from Kino. The driver had lived in the area most of his life and knew that stretch of road extremely well. On the way there, my uncle casually mentioned the old man who had helped us. When they reached the SUV, my uncle looked across the desert, expecting to see the house. But there was nothing there. No walls, no metal roof, no outdoor stove, just open land. The tow truck driver noticed the confusion on my uncle's face and asked what he was looking for. My uncle pointed toward the spot and said, "The old man's house was right there. My family spent the evening with him yesterday." The driver became very quiet. Then he told my uncle that an elderly rancher had once lived in that exact location. People in the area had known him as a kind man who often helped stranded travelers. But he had died several years earlier. His house had been torn down long before our trip. My uncle refused to believe him. He walked away from the SUV and crossed the same patch of desert we had crossed the night before. The house was gone. The only things left were a few rusted metal poles sticking out of the ground. They were the same poles that had supported the cloth above us while we drank coffee. After the SUV was towed back to Hermosillo, my uncle told the rest of the adults what he had discovered. That was when everyone began remembering the small details. None of them could clearly remember seeing the old man's eyes. He had spoken with us for hours, served us drinks, and sat only a few feet away, yet he had never once looked directly into anyone's face. The adults decided not to tell me or my younger cousin. They were afraid it would frighten us, so I didn't hear the full story until several years later. You might think learning the truth would have turned the memory into something terrifying, but it didn't. When I think back on that evening, I don't remember fear. I remember cool water after sitting in the heat. I remember the smell of coffee and firewood. I remember my family talking beneath a cloth roof while the desert sunset unfolded around us. Most of all, I remember an old man who saw a stranded family and offered them the little comfort he had. Maybe he had spent his life helping travelers along that road. Maybe some part of him simply continued doing it even after his home and his earthly life were gone. I don't know exactly what we encountered that evening. I only know that he felt real. His voice was real. The coffee was warm in our hands. The shade protected us from the sun. And when we left, he seemed happy that we had come. Some people imagine ghosts appearing in darkness, bringing cold air and terror with them. But the only apparition I may have ever met welcomed my family with coffee beneath a desert sunset. And honestly, I think that is exactly how he wanted to be remembered. I've never really believed in ghosts or anything paranormal. I'm usually the person trying to find the sensible explanation, even when everyone else is convinced something supernatural happened. But this story still unsettles me, because no matter how many times I think about it, I can't fully explain what my friend and her roommates witnessed. A few years ago, my closest friend was living in a paying guest accommodation with 3 other girls. One of them, whom I'll call Anaya, had always seemed a little different. Almost every night, usually sometime between 1 and 3 in the morning, Anaya would suddenly sit upright in bed and begin mumbling to herself. Sometimes it sounded like she was having a conversation with someone, although no one could understand what she was saying. At first, the others found it disturbing, but because it happened so regularly, they eventually assumed she was simply talking in her sleep. After a while, they stopped paying attention. Then, one evening, Anaya casually mentioned that she had seen a little boy running around near the empty courtyard behind the building in the middle of the night. The strange part was that the main gate was locked after midnight, and there were no families with young children staying nearby. The girls felt uneasy, but they convinced themselves that she had probably been half asleep or had mistaken a shadow for someone moving. A few days later, at around 5 in the morning, all 3 roommates woke up coughing. The room was filled with thick incense smoke. When they asked Anaya what she was doing, she calmly said she had woken up early and felt like performing a small prayer ceremony. It was unusual, especially at that hour, but she seemed completely normal. So once again, they let it go. Then came the night none of them could forget. Anaya went to bed at around 10, just as she normally did. At approximately 1 in the morning, my friend woke up and noticed her moving. She expected Anaya to start mumbling again. Instead, Anaya slowly sat upright and looked directly at them. She didn't speak. She just smiled. My friend told me it was the most terrifying expression she had ever seen. The smile was far too wide, stretched across her face in a way that looked almost painful. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she didn't seem to blink. At first, my friend thought she might still be dreaming, but another roommate saw it too. Both of them began crying. They called out to Anaya, but she didn't respond. She simply kept staring at them with that same unnatural smile. They panicked and started shouting for help. The moment their voices became loud, Anaya's expression suddenly vanished. Her face returned to normal. She looked around the room, confused, and asked why everyone was screaming. When they told her what she had been doing, she insisted she had no memory of it. She kept saying she had been asleep and didn't understand why they were so frightened. No one felt safe remaining in the room after that. My friend and the other girls took their phones and blankets and spent the rest of the night sitting near the building's reception area. When they finally returned upstairs the next morning, Anaya was gone. Her cupboard was locked, her bed was empty, and no one knew when she had left. My friend and her roommates packed their belongings that same day and moved to another accommodation. Later, the owner told them something that made the whole situation even more disturbing. Apparently, the girls who had shared a room with Anaya before them had also moved out suddenly. They had complained about her strange nighttime behavior, but the owner had assumed it was simply a disagreement between roommates. I know this sounds like a scene from a horror film, and maybe there is a medical or psychological explanation for everything that happened. Sleepwalking, night terrors, hallucinations. I've considered all of it. But what still bothers me is that 2 people saw the same expression at the same time, and Anaya seemed completely unaware of what she had done. I still don't know what happened in that room, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. I've never been the kind of person who believes in curses or wandering spirits. But a few years ago, a friend told me about something that happened to his uncle Raman and his family in a small village outside Tingkong, Assam. He didn't try to convince me that it was true. He just looked at me and said, "Write it down the way I remember it." So that's what I'm doing. Raman lived with his wife Mira and their 2 sons in a modest house beside a wide tea estate. It was a peaceful place. In the mornings, mist rested over the tea bushes, and by evening, the only sounds were insects and workers returning home. Everything was ordinary until one Thursday afternoon. An elderly beggar appeared at their bamboo gate and asked for something to eat. He was terribly thin. His feet were bare and covered in mud. His gray hair hung in knots around his face, and an old cream-colored cloth was wrapped loosely around his body. Mira felt sorry for him, but the family followed an old village custom. They believed that on Thursdays, nothing from the household should be given away, especially rice, salt, or cooked food. So they apologized and turned him away. The old man didn't complain. He didn't curse them. He simply lowered himself onto the ground beside the gate and sat there. He stayed for nearly an hour. He hardly moved. He just watched the house. When he finally got up, he walked a few steps, turned back, and smiled. That was all. Later that evening, while Raman was closing the gate, he noticed two holes in the ground beside the entrance. They were perfectly round and freshly dug. They didn't look like animal burrows. The edges were too smooth, almost as though someone had made them carefully by hand. Raman filled them with soil and thought no more about it. That night, the family woke to noises in the kitchen. Metal plates clattered against one another. Cupboard doors creaked open and slammed shut. Glass jars scraped slowly across the shelves. Raman searched the kitchen and every room in the house, but he found nothing. The next night, they heard heavy footsteps crossing the bamboo veranda. Whenever someone opened the front door, the footsteps stopped. There was never anyone outside. Even the family dog began behaving strangely. After sunset, it refused to go near the kitchen. Instead, it stood at the edge of the veranda, facing the tea garden and growling into the darkness. Within a few days, the house felt different. It was still their home, but it no longer felt as though they were alone in it. One evening, Mira went into the kitchen to prepare tea. As she reached for the kettle, it rose slowly from the stove by itself. She stood frozen while it floated through the air. The kettle tilted. Tea poured neatly into a glass waiting on the table. Then it returned to the stove and settled gently into place, as though an invisible person had carefully put it down. Mira fainted before she could scream. After that, everyone in the family experienced something. Doors opened on their own. Cooking utensils appeared in different places each morning. Whispers came from outside the windows after midnight. Sometimes the voice sounded close enough to touch the glass. Whenever Raman and his sons rushed outside carrying lanterns, they found only the empty yard and the silent rows of tea bushes. The younger son, Niran, laughed at the whole thing. He said everyone was frightening themselves. Niran often stayed awake late at night to study. One night, at around 2 a.m, he heard footsteps circling his chair. Slowly, round and round. He kept his eyes on his book and refused to look up. The footsteps continued until they stopped directly behind him. Finally, he lost his temper. He kicked his chair backward and shouted, "If you're really here, stop hiding." Nothing answered. When he gathered the courage to turn around, the room was empty. But on the floor behind his chair were 2 wet footprints. They were fresh, and they ended exactly where he was sitting. Niran never studied after sunset again. But the worst of it happened to Raman. One night, he woke and saw a long-haired figure lying beside his sleeping wife. Believing a stranger had entered the house, he grabbed the axe he kept near the bed. The moment he lit the lantern, the figure disappeared. Mira was still asleep. She had been alone beside him the entire time. After that night, something in Raman changed. He barely slept. He muttered to empty corners and sometimes stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence, as though he were listening to someone else. Then, without warning, he smashed every mirror in the house. When Mira asked him why, he said that whenever he looked into a mirror, someone was standing behind him. Not in the room, only in the reflection. A few mornings later, before sunrise, Raman walked into the tea garden. The air was cold and thick with mist. Between two rows of tea bushes, he saw something kneeling with its back toward him. At first, he thought it was an injured worker. Its skin looked gray and damp, like ash after rain. Raman called out, but it didn't answer. He moved closer. Very slowly, the figure turned toward him. It had no face, no eyes, no mouth, no knees, just smooth gray skin. But in the center of its chest was one enormous eye. The eye opened. Then it blinked. Only once. Raman collapsed among the tea bushes. The villagers found him later that morning, burning with fever and repeating the same words again and again. "It's still watching me." The village elders believed that a wandering spirit called a bira had entered the property. They sent for a bez, a traditional healer from another village. The bez arrived near sunset carrying a small cloth bag and a wooden staff. The moment he stepped through the bamboo gate, he stopped. Nobody had told him about the holes, but he pointed to the ground beside the entrance and said, "It came in through here." The ritual began after midnight. The bez spread rice flour, mustard seeds, and dried leaves across the floor. He lit an oil lamp and began chanting prayers in a low voice. As the prayers continued, the air inside the house became strangely heavy. Then something ran barefoot across the roof, back and forth, back and forth. The footsteps became faster until they suddenly stopped. The bez asked the family to bring him a live black rooster. He held the bird firmly in both hands and shouted, "Tell me who sent you." The rooster struggled violently. Its wings beat against his arms. Then, all at once, it became completely still. When it opened its beak, the voice that came from it was not the cry of a bird. It was a dry, broken whisper. "I was sent." Before it could finish, the rooster's neck twisted sharply. The bird fell dead in the healer's hands. The bez ordered everyone to remain inside. "No matter what you hear," he warned them, "do not look outside." A few moments later, a scream rose from somewhere deep within the tea garden. It didn't sound human. It didn't sound like any animal they knew. It was one long, impossible cry that stretched through the darkness before slowly fading away. The bez listened until there was silence. Then he said, "It has left." After that night, the footsteps stopped. The whispers disappeared. The cupboards remained closed. The utensils stayed where they were placed, and nothing moved on its own again. Raman and his family continued living in that house for many years, but Raman was never quite the same. Over time, he lost most of his hearing. Until the day he died, he insisted that the eye he had seen in the tea garden had never truly stopped watching him. The house is still there. Children play in the yard, and the tea garden looks peaceful beneath the morning mist. But the older villagers still refuse to speak about that Thursday. And when someone asks them why, they give only one answer. Some things do not force their way into a home. Sometimes they are invited inside. So I guess the best place to begin is where all of this started. A few months ago, my girlfriend Maya and I moved into an old apartment complex. We later found out that the property had been built near what used to be a large cemetery. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I've always been skeptical about ghosts, spirits, and anything paranormal. But I was also going through a very dark period in my life. My dependence on benzodiazepines had gotten worse, and I was mixing them with alcohol. I was struggling with anger, frightening thoughts, and behavior that I barely recognized as my own. Eventually, I ended up spending several days in jail where I went through a severe withdrawal. It was brutal. I had seizures, intense hallucinations, shaking, sweating, and sudden waves of unbearable heat and cold. I know withdrawal can distort your senses, and I don't dismiss that. But while I was lying alone in that cell, I constantly felt as though something was watching me. More than once, I thought I saw a tall shadow in the corner. It seemed to have horns, and the atmosphere around it felt heavy and threatening. Whenever it appeared, I would pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Eventually, the figure would fade, and the room would feel calm again. When I was released, I reunited with Maya, and she told me strange things had been happening at the apartment while I was gone. One night, she and a friend were sitting in our bedroom when a heavy suitcase suddenly fell out of the closet with enough force to cross part of the room. She also heard knocking from inside the closet, footsteps moving through the apartment, and lights flickering in unusual patterns. At one point, 3 scratches appeared on her skin. She even managed to record some of the flickering on her phone. Not long afterward, we left the apartment and moved into a small trailer with my father. I hoped a new place would mean a fresh start, but the uneasy feeling came with us. One evening, Maya and I watched a drawer with a magnetic latch slowly slide open by itself. A couple of nights later, she entered my father's dark bedroom and froze. She said she saw a shadowy figure curled up near the wall. It appeared to have long hair and horn-like shapes on its head. What disturbed her most was its reaction. When it turned toward her, it didn't look angry. It looked frightened, almost as though it had seen something standing behind her that she couldn't see. A few days later, my father, Maya, and I decided to spend a night or two at a hotel. Just before we left, my father quietly told me, "I had to leave the closet light on last night. I felt like someone was standing in the corner." That was the moment I realized this experience was no longer mine alone. I know how this story sounds. I've experienced psychosis and hallucinations before, especially during withdrawal, and I understand that the mind can create things that feel completely real. But these events have also been reported by Maya, her friend, and my father, sometimes when I wasn't even present. That is why I'm struggling to understand what is happening. My father wonders whether it could somehow involve aliens. I'm not completely dismissing any explanation, but the experiences seem to stop when I pray. Because of that, part of me wonders whether there is something spiritual behind them. There have also been moments when I felt something grab my foot and pull it away from my body. The sensation was followed by a sharp, burning pain. Maya has described being touched or scratched as well. We're frightened and we need help, but money is extremely tight. I don't know whether we should speak to a priest, a mental health professional, a doctor, or someone else entirely. Honestly, we may need support from more than one direction, especially considering everything I've been through with addiction and withdrawal. I'm sharing this because I want to know whether anyone else has experienced something similar. Were you able to find a reasonable explanation? Did anything help you feel safe again? I'm not asking anyone to blindly believe me. I'm only describing what we experienced as sincerely as I can. For now, I'm trying to stay sober, remain close to the people I trust, document what happens, and seek proper medical and spiritual guidance. Prayer has brought me comfort through all of this. It reminds me that even when life feels filled with shadows, there may still be light nearby. A few weeks ago, I would have laughed at a story like this. I was skeptical of ghosts, demons, and even faith itself. Now I'm simply not as certain as I used to be. I don't know whether what we encountered was paranormal, psychological, environmental, or some combination of those things. I only know that it felt real to us, and I hope that by speaking honestly, we can begin to understand it and find our way back to safety. I want to share something that's been weighing on me for quite some time now. It's been a living nightmare, and I think finally opening up about it might help, even if just a little. I'm Mark, 51 years old, and about a year and a half ago, I bought this old house out in the heart of the Midwest, smack in the middle of endless cornfields. The house is roughly 120 years old, creaky and full of history, but that history seems to come with a dark side. From the very first night we moved in, my girlfriend Lisa and I noticed strange things happening. The house was empty except for us. We'd catch glimpses of dark shadows darting just at the edge of our vision. Neither of us could quite pin down what they were, but we both saw the same fleeting shapes. It was unsettling, but we thought maybe it was just our minds adjusting to the old place. The house needed a ton of work, more than I initially thought. I'm pretty handy, so I jumped right into remodeling. I started tearing down some baseboards, fixing walls, the usual stuff. The first piece of wood I pulled off revealed something odd. 2 old postcards tucked behind it, dated April 1910. It gave me chills, like the house was whispering its secrets. As I kept working, the strange occurrences only increased. There were noises, cold drafts, and those shadows seemed to get bolder. After a while, though, I just lost all my energy and drive. I couldn't explain it. It was like something was draining me. I put the tools down and tried to ignore it. Fast forward about 6 months, and things got worse. I started hearing this weird ringing in my ears. Not just a high-pitched tone, but more like the screeching static from an old dial-up modem. It was constant, relentless. Lisa started hearing it too, and it didn't stop for either of us. It was maddening, like the noise was inside our heads, echoing non-stop. Last year, I bought a full-spectrum camera, hoping to catch whatever was lurking in those shadows. I set it up on a tripod, motion-activated, and left it running for about 20 minutes. The camera triggered a few times, but when I checked the footage, there was nothing visible. It freaked me out so much that I packed the camera away and didn't touch it again for nearly 8 months. But then, about 6 weeks ago, I dug the camera back out. Along with it, I downloaded a spirit box app on my phone. I was skeptical, really, but desperate for any answers. I'm a bit of an obsessive type. Once I latch onto something, I have to figure it out. The next 2 weeks were pure terror. The camera started capturing hundreds of orbs, like tiny glowing balls streaming out of the walls and floor. It was like a fire hose of light pouring into the room. I couldn't believe my eyes. And the spirit box, it wouldn't stop talking. Day or night, it was constant. But what really shook me was how intelligent the voices were. They spoke about local unsolved murders, missing children, things no one should know. They even told me what I was doing, proving they were watching me all the time. Some of the messages were warnings about future events, and those things actually happened. It was addictive and terrifying at the same time. Then, something changed. It attached to me. I've never been that scared in my life. My entire body felt electrified, like tiny shocks running through my skin. My hair stood on end, and goosebumps covered me. My pupils dilated fully, and for a moment, I swear my irises looked bright blue. Impossible because I have brown eyes. Whenever I stepped into a room, I heard popping noises. Things moved on their own. Candles flickered wildly with flames bending at right angles. I started waking up with strange marks, burns, bites, scratches that I couldn't explain. Lisa and I finally fled the house, sleeping in my truck for 3 weeks in freezing weather. It was 18 degrees out there, but safer than being inside. Everywhere I went, electrical devices malfunctioned. My phone would flash on and off if I held it. I heard horrifying growls and screams coming through my phone and car stereo, even when they were off. My life spiraled downward fast. The entity attached to Lisa briefly, and even a few friends who visited the house felt its presence. We had the house blessed a couple of times, but most churches didn't want to get involved. They were scared or unwilling. So a friend Lisa and I started trying to rid the house ourselves. There have been moments of success, but the darkness still lingers. I'm sharing this not for attention or fame, but because I need help. Family and friends think we're crazy, but we're not. At least, we know we're not. It's just hard to make sense of something so terrifying and unseen. This happened sometime in the mid-1990s in the living room of our family home in southeastern Hungary. I was very young, probably too young to remember every detail exactly as it happened. Still, there are certain parts of that morning that have never left me. The image of the man, especially, remains incredibly clear. When I first became aware of him, I was already standing inside the living room, just a few steps away. Because I was a small child, I saw him from very low down. I remember tilting my head back to look at him. He was extraordinarily tall. Years later, my father guessed that the man might have been a little over 2 meters tall. From where I stood, though, he seemed almost impossibly large, as though his hat might brush the ceiling. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s. His skin was pale, and he had dark hair, a heavy mustache, and a little stubble along his jaw. He wore a broad black hat pulled low enough that his eyes were difficult to see. His coat was long, dark, and open at the front. Underneath it, he wore a loose cream-colored shirt that looked like linen. A wide brown leather belt was fastened around his waist, over his trousers, with a large, dull gold buckle. The trousers were one of the strangest things about him. They were loose and old-fashioned, patterned with narrow vertical stripes in dark gray and faded white. Then there were the boots. They were tall, made of dark leather, and seemed fairly ordinary around the ankles. But the toes widened suddenly into a broad, rounded shape. They reminded me slightly of stage shoes, though they were not brightly colored or comical. They simply looked unusual, almost handmade. Everything about the man seemed to belong to another century. Standing there in our ordinary living room, surrounded by familiar furniture and summer sunlight, he looked completely out of place. And yet he also looked entirely real. He was not transparent. There was no glow around him, no fog, no flickering shadow. He looked solid enough that I felt I could have reached out and touched the sleeve of his coat. But I did not. He stood perfectly still. I remember his whole body leaning forward just slightly, almost too slightly to notice. Yet his posture remained completely straight, from the soles of his boots to the crown of his hat. He was not bending at the waist or lowering his head. It was probably late morning. At the time, the terrace outside had no covering, so bright summer light came through the tall window along the side of the room. The light created a faint outline around him, but it looked natural, like ordinary sunlight falling behind a person. He never spoke. I do not remember hearing him breathe, move, or make any sound at all. For most of my life, I believed I had been the only one who saw him. Then, many years later, my father told me something I had never heard before. He said that during that same period, perhaps later that summer, he had also seen a very tall man standing in the living room. My father had been looking in from the hallway. It was afternoon, and the room was much brighter than it had been during my memory. Until that conversation, he only knew that I had once seen a tall, old-fashioned figure as a child. He did not know the details. I had never described the clothing to him carefully. But when he began telling me what he had seen, he mentioned the same wide black hat, the same long dark coat, the pale shirt underneath, the broad leather belt, the loose trousers with vertical stripes. He also remembered the man standing completely upright and almost entirely motionless. There was one unsettling difference. My father said that while the man's body remained still, his eyes followed him across the hallway. He also noticed the slightest movement of the man's head, as though the figure were calmly watching him pass. Our memories differed when it came to the boots. My father remembered pale wool or sheepskin folded over the tops. I remember only dark leather, with nothing light-colored around them. I cannot say what we saw. More than 3 decades have passed, and I know that childhood memories can change. Details fade, shift, and sometimes become tangled with imagination. I am not claiming that the man was a ghost, or that something supernatural definitely happened. What stays with me is the fact that my father described nearly the same figure in the same room during roughly the same summer, without ever knowing the full details of what I remembered. The images I create of him are not proof of anything. They are simply attempts to reconstruct the silent stranger who, for a few unforgettable moments, appeared to stand inside our home. Hey, I want to share some stories with you. Real experiences that feel like they're right on the edge between the ordinary and the strange. Things that make you pause and wonder if there's more to the world than what we see every day. So, get comfortable, and let's dive in. First, there was this night with my coven. Yeah, that's right, we have our little group, and we were just hanging out, doing our usual thing. But something different happened. I saw a spirit. Now that's not common for me, so I mentioned it, and we decided to explore. We cast a circle, creating a safe space around us, like a protective bubble. And we used some divination tools, a pendulum, and some cards. The air was thick with anticipation, the soft candlelight flickering shadows on the walls. As we focused, we started to uncover the story of this spirit. We'd always had this uneasy feeling about the guy living upstairs. The neighborhood's rough. It's a rural area right next to a reservation, the kind of place where the good and bad mix in complicated ways. People had noticed how he'd bring young native girls into his place. They'd be seen around for a few days, and then just vanish. When we called out the spirit's name, which we found on a missing persons list from a city a few hours away, something shifted. The energy in the room thickened. The pendulum swung more steadily, almost like the spirit was guiding it. The cards revealed some chilling details. When he died, how it happened. And now, his rage was focused directly at that upstairs apartment. Despite all that anger, the spirit seemed to trust us, the coven members. I asked if he could show me where his body was, and for the first time, the pendulum gave a definite yes. It's somewhere on the property. I get the feeling it's mostly intact, but probably not recognizable as him anymore. It all felt surreal, like I was trapped in a crime show. My friends are desperate to get out of that house, but what do we do? Do we tell the police? All I have is a ghostly pendulum swing and a hunch that the body's in the shed. This kid's been missing for months. He deserves closure. His family deserves to know what happened to him. Now, on to another story, one that's a bit different, but just as profound. I was walking through a city one day, headphones on, music filling my ears. I was tired, but peaceful. Suddenly, everything changed. It wasn't darkness that took over. It was like my body vanished, and I was just pure consciousness, floating in a stream of uninterrupted thoughts. The world around me seemed to fade, like a thin veil separating me from pure awareness. I could sense the city, the people, but it all felt distant, like a delicate paper shield I was gently pushing away. I was no longer a person walking down the street. I was just being. This state lasted maybe 10, 15 minutes. When I came back to myself, it was gentle, like waking from a dream. I knew I'd experienced something mystical, something science can't yet explain. Since then, I've hoped for it to happen again, but it never quite does. It made me realize how much of what we see and feel is just our brain's construction, a fragile reality built on shaky sensory data. I don't think we need to call these things paranormal. They're natural, just beyond our current understanding. Here's one more that stuck with me since I was a kid. When I was about 8, I had this old Star Trek action figure, Spock. His shirt would snap apart, and his limbs would fall off. I'd take him apart and put him back together all the time, sometimes pretending he'd been attacked by aliens. One day, after setting up a pretty gruesome scene with my figures, my mom called me down for dinner. When I came back up, Spock was gone. Just him. My other toys were right where I left them. I searched everywhere that night, thinking maybe my little brother had moved him, but no luck. The next morning, I checked again. Still nothing. Then, on a whim, I peeked into the guest room below my bedroom, a room we barely ever used. And there he was, Spock, completely dismantled, lying in the exact position I'd left him the night before. I asked my parents, but they had no answers. My brother couldn't have done it. He was too little to get downstairs or arrange the toy like that. It was as if Spock had simply moved right through the floor. Now this one really creeped me out. When I was 19, my mom was in the hospital, pretty far away. I was home alone in my parents' big house, which is set off the beaten path, near a lagoon. My room is in its own wing, with a door that can be locked. That night, I was up late on my laptop. The lights in my wing suddenly went out, every single one. The little glow under my door vanished, and I froze. Then, the door slammed shut with a force that sounded like someone kicked it. My heart jumped. I grabbed a knife I kept nearby and got ready, thinking if someone was there, I'd be ready. But when I opened the door, no one was there. The house was empty, alarm still armed. The door had a strange bow in it, like it had taken a hit. Hours later, the lights under the door went out again. This time, I was terrified. I pushed my bed against the door and hid in my closet, waiting for dawn. When morning came, my dad was back home, and I asked if he'd turned off the lights. He had no idea what I was talking about. To this day, I don't know what happened, but that bowed door still stands as a silent reminder. And finally, a story from about 4 years ago. I was chatting with my girlfriend on Skype late at night in my apartment on the second floor. My parents' place has 3 rooms, and my dad was sleeping in their bedroom. My mom was out for a walk. I got up to use the bathroom and heard footsteps on the stairs. Thinking it might be my mom, I looked through the peephole and saw a little girl, maybe 10 years old, standing perfectly still in the dark stairwell. It was strange. The stair lights should have been on, but it was dark except for the faint glow coming through the windows from outside. I stared at her for what felt like minutes, but was just seconds, then ran back to my room, shaken. The next day, I found out the elderly woman living next door had been dead for 3 days. She was close to our family, always kind with little gifts and treats. I can't help but think the girl was some kind of message, a whisper from beyond. And I didn't know about the woman's passing when I saw her, so it couldn't have been my imagination. These stories, they remind me that the world holds more mysteries than we often realize. Sometimes, it feels like the veil between worlds is thin, and those shadows, ghosts, spirits, memories, are trying to reach out. Thanks for listening. I hope sharing these moments has made you feel a little less alone in the dark corners of the night. I've had a handful of strange things happen to me over the years, but this is the one I still come back to. I'm a pretty grounded person. I don't scare easily, and I've always thought that things like ghosts or spirits might just be something science hasn't quite caught up with yet. I barely drink, maybe once or twice a year, and I don't use drugs. I've worked in hospice care for a long time, nearly 16 years now, and as you can imagine, I've seen and heard some unusual things in nursing. But those are stories for another time. I'm telling you that because when people hear this story, they usually look at me like I'm exaggerating or making it up. And honestly, if someone else told it to me, I'm not sure I'd believe them either. But I was there. I saw it. I felt it. This happened years ago, when my friend Gia and I were at her house. It was a small place. When you walked through the front door, the stairs were right there in front of you, leading up to 3 little bedrooms. Off to the right was a door into the living room, and from there you could get to the kitchen and bathroom. We were sitting in the living room that night, and her little boy, who was about 3, was asleep upstairs. Now, back then, Gia and I were really interested in ghost hunting. Her house already had a reputation between us. Doors would slam on their own. Things would get knocked around in the kitchen. Once, when I was there by myself, I heard what sounded exactly like a dining chair scraping across the floor. I went to check, and the chair was sitting right in the middle of the kitchen. So that night, we decided to try something. We put 2 candles in the middle of the coffee table, then placed 8 smaller candles all around the edge. We sat across from each other and started asking questions. We said one candle could flicker for yes, and the other could flicker for no. At first, nothing much happened. Then we started talking about one of Gia's friends who had died in a car accident. As soon as we mentioned him, the yes candle flickered. Gia asked, "Is that you?" And the candle flickered again. So we kept asking questions, and the answers came through the 2 candles. Yes or no. Flicker, pause, flicker. The strange thing was that none of the other candles moved. Not one. Just those 2. I'd never seen anything like it. Then Gia asked, "Can you make the other candles flicker too?" And one by one, going around the table in order, each of the 8 smaller candles flickered. It was slow and deliberate, almost like someone was walking around the coffee table and blowing gently on each flame as they passed. That was the moment I started to feel afraid. There was no breeze. We weren't moving. The windows were closed. Nothing in that room should have caused it. Then we heard a thud upstairs. Gia got up right away to check on her son. When she came back down, she looked unsettled. She said he was still fast asleep in his crib, but several books had fallen from his shelf and landed in the middle of the floor. Right after she said that, the yes candle flickered again. She asked, "Did you do that?" And it flickered yes. That was enough for both of us. We decided we were done. We were scared by then, really scared. But before we ended it, and I honestly don't know why I did this, I asked, "Can you blow out the candle closest to me?" The flame nearest me started flickering wildly. Not the others, just that one. It looked exactly like someone was blowing on it. Then it went out. We both panicked and said out loud that we were ending the session. We started blowing out the candles, and that's when we heard another thud upstairs. Only this time, it wasn't just a thud. It sounded like heavy footsteps running quickly down the stairs. Then the handle on the closed door between the living room and the hallway started rattling. Not a tiny shake. It rattled hard for several seconds. Then it stopped. We had to open the door because Gia's son was upstairs, and we needed to make sure he was okay. But when we opened it, there was nothing there. The front door was still locked. Nobody had come in. Her son was still asleep. After that, we just sat there, shaken, trying to talk through what had happened. Then my mobile phone started ringing. This was before smartphones. My phone was sitting on top of the TV, and it was around 2 in the morning, so a call at that hour was strange enough. I picked it up and looked at the screen. The number was just zeros. 00000000000. I didn't answer it. Part of me still wishes I had. And that's my story. That's the one I can't explain. I know I can't prove it to anyone, and I know it sounds unbelievable. I'm just grateful Gia was there with me, because if I'd experienced it alone, I think I would have questioned my own memory. It happened about 20 years ago, and I can still see that room clearly. The table, the candles, the door handle shaking. I wish I had an explanation. I really do. I should start by saying this didn't happen to me. It happened to my mother many years ago, when she was still a schoolgirl. She was studying at a boarding school run by nuns. It wasn't a place for girls becoming nuns or anything like that. It was just a regular convent school, the kind where the rules were strict, the halls were quiet after lights out, and every shadow seemed to know it was being watched. Back then, she and some of the other girls used to play something called Spirit of the Glass. It was a little like a Ouija board, except instead of a planchette, they used a clear drinking glass. They would make a board with letters and words on it, light a white candle, say a prayer, and place 2 fingers on the glass. Then they would turn the glass 3 times and call for a spirit. There were rules, of course. You could only play after midnight, only by candlelight, and when you were finished, you were supposed to pray for the soul and pass the glass through the smoke of the white candle to close everything properly. My mother was around 13 or 14 at the time, young enough to be frightened by everything, but old enough to go looking for answers when adults refused to give them. And something had happened at the school. A senior student had died by suicide. Her name was Clara, or at least that's what I'll call her here. She was older than my mother, beautiful, clever, and well-liked. The younger girls admired her from a distance, the way younger students often admire someone who seems to move through the world with confidence. People said she had been in love with a boy her parents did not approve of. They had forbidden the relationship completely. After that, Clara left a note. My mother only heard pieces of it at the time, whispered from one girl to another. But the message was something like, she had come into the world with nothing. She had been made to live with nothing, and so she would leave with nothing too. Then she was found in her dorm room, having hanged herself with no clothes on. In those days, especially in a Catholic school, suicide was not something people spoke about openly. It was treated like a terrible shame, a grave sin, something to be hidden under silence and prayer. The adults didn't explain anything to the students. They didn't comfort them properly. They simply acted as though if no one spoke her name, the grief would dry up on its own. But it didn't. The girls were scared. They were confused. And because no adult would help them understand what had happened, they tried to reach her themselves. That Friday night, after midnight, my mother and a few of her friends gathered in their dorm room. They lit the candle, set up the board, placed their fingers on the glass, and began. At first, nothing happened. They asked if anyone was there. Nothing. They waited. Still nothing. For a while, they avoided saying Clara's name. Maybe they were afraid of being disrespectful. Maybe they were afraid she would answer. But eventually, one of the girls whispered it. "Clara, are you here?" And the glass moved. My mother said she didn't believe it right away. None of them did. They thought someone at the table must have been pushing it, trying to scare the others. But then she noticed something strange about the glass. It had been completely clear before. Now it looked cloudy inside, almost like a tiny thread of smoke had been trapped in it. The glass began spelling out words. Slowly at first, then more steadily. The girls wrote everything down. They didn't understand the message then, not fully. But later, they would realize it was almost exactly the same as the note Clara had left behind. They asked questions to test her. Small things, private things, things they thought only Clara might know, or that would reveal if one of them was playing a cruel joke. Then one girl asked, "Where are you now?" The glass moved. H-E-L-L. The moment it finished spelling the word, the glass began to spin. My mother said it spun so fast under their fingers that it felt impossible. The other girls screamed and pulled their hands away. One ran for the door. Another started crying for the nun on duty. But my mother kept her fingers on the glass. She was terrified. Of course she was. But she remembered the rules. You weren't supposed to just stop. You had to close the session properly. You had to pray. You had to smoke out the glass with the candle. So she stayed there, fingers trembling, while the glass continued to turn beneath them. And then it stopped. The room went very still. My mother said that was when she felt someone sitting beside her, not standing in the corner, not hovering over her, sitting right there, close enough that she felt the shape of a presence beside her body. But she said it didn't feel evil. That was the thing she always insisted on. It didn't feel angry. It didn't feel threatening. It felt curious, almost amused, as though Clara had been watching a group of little girls scare themselves half to death and found it faintly funny. Before my mother could finish the prayer or pass the glass through the candle smoke, the nun burst into the room and turned on the lights. Everything changed in an instant. The candle was taken. The board was taken. The glass was taken. The girls were punished the next morning and questioned by the school. The nuns told them they had not spoken to Clara. They said it was the devil. They said the girls had opened a door they should never have touched. They were told to pray for their souls and confess everything to a priest. But when the girls told the nuns and the priest what the glass had spelled out, the adults went pale. That was when my mother knew the message had been real. After that night, the dorm room changed. My mother said Clara was simply there. Not every moment, not always in a dramatic way, but present. The room felt occupied even when it was empty. The other girls felt uncomfortable, but none of them experienced what my mother did. She heard footsteps. At night, after lights out, she would hear them coming down the hallway. Slow, soft steps. They would enter the room, come toward her bed, and sometimes circle it. Most often, the footsteps stopped near her head, on the left side. She never saw anyone. That was what bothered her most. Not the feeling of Clara, because that still didn't feel cruel or dangerous. It was the sound of someone walking around her bed when no one was there. Eventually, during term break, my mother went home to her province and told her own mother what had been happening. My grandmother was the kind of woman who knew prayers, folk remedies, and old spiritual things people didn't talk about too loudly. She listened, then called a woman who knew how to close a person's ears and eyes to the spirit world. My mother said some kind of prayer or ritual was done over her. After that, when she returned to school the next term, she no longer heard the footsteps, but she could still feel Clara in the room. Then, sometime later, Clara's family managed to have a priest bless her grave and pray for her soul. My mother didn't know exactly when that happened. No one announced it to the students. She only knew that one day, the feeling in the dorm room was gone. Not faded slowly, just gone. To this day, my mother says she never believed Clara meant to harm her. She was frightened by the footsteps, yes, especially because they came around bedtime, and Clara was believed to have died not long after lights out. But the presence itself never felt wicked to her. She always described it the same way. Light, curious, a little playful, as if Clara had never really wanted to scare them. Maybe she only wanted someone, finally, to listen. I was 16, maybe 17, and my parents were working overnight shifts back then, so I had the house to myself a lot. And for a while, I got really into those ritual games people used to post online. One-man hide and seek, Bloody Mary, the elevator game, the bathhouse woman one, Ouija boards, the holders stuff, all of it. I tried more than I can honestly remember. Most of them did absolutely nothing. That kind of became my thing. I'd find some weird little ritual online, try it out alone, then write up what happened on paranormal boards. Usually, the answer was, nothing happened, because of course nothing happened. But there was one that got under my skin. Looking back, it was stupid. I know that. It was obviously just a knockoff of a bunch of better-known games, mostly the Midnight Game and One-Man Hide and Seek. The name was something like The Static Man or The Dusk Game. I don't remember exactly. It had that same dramatic internet horror flavor, all rules and warnings and vague consequences. The setup was simple enough. You had to wait until after sundown. Then you closed every blind in the house, turned off every light, and found an old TV that could still show static. You were supposed to draw a symbol on the screen. The post had this little messy picture attached, some crooked sigil-looking thing. I didn't have paint or chalk nearby, so I used one of my mom's lip liners. Then you turned the TV toward the wall and switched it on. The idea was that whatever you had invited in could see through the screen. Turning it toward the wall was supposed to stop it from watching you directly, which made no sense, but at that age, half the fun was pretending it did. After that, you had to move around the house and hide in certain rooms you'd marked as safe. You were supposed to put something religious inside each safe room before starting. A cross, a prayer card, anything like that. Then every couple of hours you had to switch rooms, because the thing would eventually figure out where you were. The post was very unclear about what happened if it caught you. It said something like, "It will make you do things." That was the whole threat. No details. Just that. And honestly, that was probably the worst part. Because once the game started, I was sitting upstairs in one of my safe rooms, trying to act bored, trying to prove to myself that nothing was going to happen. But partway through the night, I started hearing noises from downstairs. Voices first. Loud ones. Then something that sounded like bells. Then this low, ugly static noise rising and falling from the first floor. I remember sitting there completely still, listening, and suddenly feeling like the whole house had changed shape around me. The rooms felt bigger. The hallway felt longer. Every little sound had teeth. Then I heard thumping above me, not downstairs, above me, on the roof. That was the moment I stopped feeling clever. I had also, very stupidly, smoked before starting the game, so my nerves were already dressed in fireworks. I stayed upstairs the rest of the night, glued to those safe rooms, barely moving, just waiting until the time was up so I could go downstairs and turn the TV off. When it was finally over, I ran down, killed the static, wiped the lipstick off the screen, and told myself I had handled it fine. I had not handled it fine. The next day, I figured out what actually happened. I'd left a window cracked open downstairs near the front door. A storm had rolled in that night. My mom had wind chimes hanging outside, and the bells I heard were almost definitely those. I lived near a college campus, and some neighbors were throwing a party, so the voices were probably just drunk people yelling over the rain. And the thumping on the roof? Hail. That was it. Wind chimes, drunk neighbors, hail, and an old TV hissing at a wall. No entity. no possession, no shadowy thing creeping from room to room. Just a dumb game, bad weather, and a teenager scaring himself half to death. I kept trying ritual games after that too. Plenty of them. Nothing ever happened again. I was 16, maybe 17, and my parents were working overnight shifts back then, so I had the house to myself a lot. And for a while, I got really into those ritual games people used to post online. One-man hide and seek, Bloody Mary, the elevator game, the bathhouse woman one, Ouija boards, the holders stuff, all of it. I tried more than I can honestly remember. Most of them did absolutely nothing. That kind of became my thing. I'd find some weird little ritual online, try it out alone, then write up what happened on paranormal boards. Usually the answer was, nothing happened, because of course nothing happened. But there was one that got under my skin. Looking back, it was stupid. I know that. It was obviously just a knockoff of a bunch of better-known games, mostly the Midnight Game and One-Man Hide and Seek. The name was something like The Static Man or The Dusk Game. I don't remember exactly. It had that same dramatic internet horror flavor, all rules and warnings and vague consequences. The setup was simple enough. You had to wait until after sundown. Then you closed every blind in the house, turned off every light, and found an old TV that could still show static. You were supposed to draw a symbol on the screen. The post had this little messy picture attached, some crooked sigil-looking thing. I didn't have paint or chalk nearby, so I used one of my mom's lip liners. Then you turned the TV toward the wall and switched it on. The idea was that whatever you had invited in could see through the screen. Turning it toward the wall was supposed to stop it from watching you directly, which made no sense. But at that age, half the fun was pretending it did. After that, you had to move around the house and hide in certain rooms you'd marked as safe. You were supposed to put something religious inside each safe room before starting. A cross, a prayer card, anything like that. Then every couple of hours you had to switch rooms, because the thing would eventually figure out where you were. The post was very unclear about what happened if it caught you. It said something like, "It will make you do things." That was the whole threat. No details. Just that. And honestly, that was probably the worst part. Because once the game started, I was sitting upstairs in one of my safe rooms, trying to act bored, trying to prove to myself that nothing was going to happen. But partway through the night, I started hearing noises from downstairs. Voices first, loud ones, then something that sounded like bells, then this low, ugly static noise rising and falling from the first floor. I remember sitting there completely still, listening, and suddenly feeling like the whole house had changed shape around me. The rooms felt bigger. The hallway felt longer. Every little sound had teeth. Then I heard thumping above me. Not downstairs. Above me. On the roof. That was the moment I stopped feeling clever. I had also, very stupidly, smoked before starting the game, so my nerves were already dressed in fireworks. I stayed upstairs the rest of the night, glued to those safe rooms, barely moving, just waiting until the time was up so I could go downstairs and turn the TV off. When it was finally over, I ran down, killed the static, wiped the lipstick off the screen, and told myself I had handled it fine. I had not handled it fine. The next day, I figured out what actually happened. I'd left a window cracked open downstairs near the front door. A storm had rolled in that night. My mom had wind chimes hanging outside, and the bells I heard were almost definitely those. I lived near a college campus, and some neighbors were throwing a party, so the voices were probably just drunk people yelling over the rain. And the thumping on the roof? Hail, that was it. Wind chimes, drunk neighbors, hail, and an old TV hissing at a wall. No entity, no possession, No shadowy thing creeping from room to room. Just a dumb game, bad weather, and a teenager scaring himself half to death. I kept trying ritual games after that too. Plenty of them. Nothing ever happened again. 4. The last knock in the little downstairs bathroom. I grew up in a house that always felt like it had more people in it than the ones actually living there. Not always in a bad way, though. That's the strange part. Some of the energy felt heavy, sure, but a lot of it was just there. Neutral. Almost like old weather trapped in the walls. And I'm pretty sure at least one thing in that house was residual, just replaying itself without really noticing us. Even before we moved there, back when we lived in an apartment, my family had little paranormal experiences. Nothing too dramatic most of the time. We even had what I swear was a ghost cat. You'd feel it curl up against you or brush past your ankles, and it was oddly sweet. But the thing I'm going to tell you about now was not sweet. Our house had originally been an old cider mill, later turned into a home sometime in the early 1900s. Then, decades after that, someone added onto it. I think the addition was built around the 1970s. The experience happened in the downstairs bathroom, which was part of that newer addition. And this bathroom was tiny. I mean, it was the kind of little powder room that had absolutely no business also having a shower stall in it. But somehow it did. You could barely move around in there. The walls had these plastic sheets made to look like tile, but they weren't attached very well. There was space behind them, so if you pressed your hand against the wall, the plastic would bend inward until it hit the drywall underneath. That detail matters. I want you to picture that wall clearly. One day, my younger sister Mara and I were home alone. I was probably about 15 and she was around 11. We had been doing chores all morning and were about to stop for lunch. Of course, because my body has always had a dramatic sense of timing, the second food was about to happen, I had to use the bathroom. So there I was, sitting in that tiny downstairs bathroom, with no phone or anything to distract me because this was before we all carried tiny glowing worlds in our pockets. I was just thinking about what chores we still had left to do after lunch. Then this weird feeling came over me. It was almost like nausea, but not in my stomach. It was in my head. A strange, woozy pressure, like the air had changed. And then I heard 5 bangs on the wall beside me. Not random creaks, not pipes. 5 clear knocks, spaced about half a second apart. At first, I thought it was Mara. The living room was on the other side of that area, in the older part of the house, and I thought maybe she needed me for something. Even though that wall should have been thick enough to muffle just about anything, the bangs sounded intentional. So I called out, "Just a minute." About 15 or 20 seconds passed. Then that same awful feeling started building again. The pressure in my head returned, stronger this time. A few seconds later, there were 3 much louder bangs on that same wall. These were slower, heavier, about a full second between each one, and they were hard enough to shake the mirror above the sink. I could feel them through the floor with my feet. This time, it didn't sound like someone knocking from another room. It sounded like someone was pounding directly on the drywall behind the plastic tile sheet, right next to me. I was scared, but I also tried to be practical. I told myself maybe Mara was trying to scare me. Maybe she was being annoying. So I yelled louder, "Just give me a second!" But at that point, I was already planning to get out of there as fast as possible. Whatever was going on, I didn't want to sit around and negotiate with it. Then the feeling came a third time, and this time it was different. It rushed through me, not just in my head, but in my stomach too. It felt deep and sharp, like something predatory had suddenly noticed me and was moving fast. I actually put my arms out to brace myself against both walls, because I felt like I might pitch forward off the toilet. Then, when I moved my hands away, there was one final slam. Just one. but it was enormous. The plastic wall sheet shook like something had punched the drywall from the other side. I heard little bits of dust and debris sliding and settling behind the plastic. Even the water in the toilet trembled. That was it for me. I pulled my pants up so fast I didn't even care if I had to deal with laundry later, and I ran out of that bathroom without flushing. I did go back and flush later, once my soul had returned to my body, but in that moment, absolutely not. I was gone. I found Mara somewhere else in the house. I don't remember exactly where, but she wasn't in the living room, and she definitely wasn't banging on that wall. She swore then, and still swears now, that it wasn't her. And honestly, after that final slam, I didn't really believe it could have been her anyway. I've heard people talk about Tommy knockers showing up in places other than mines, but I don't know. I'm not sure that's what this was. I don't know what it was. What I do know is that it scared me badly enough that I stopped using that downstairs bathroom completely. Thankfully, we had a bigger bathroom upstairs, a nicer one, a quieter one, and most importantly, one that never knocked back. I was 19 at the time, and my ex was 20. We were back home in Romania, where stories about spirits, curses, and witchcraft aren't exactly rare. People talk about that kind of thing pretty openly, especially in villages, and whether you believe it or not, it has a way of staying in the back of your mind. Her family had a strange history with it too. From what she told me, her father had once been cursed by a woman from his village. Apparently, that woman had wanted him for herself, but he ended up with my ex's mother instead. Later, when my ex was still a child, her bedroom caught fire while she was inside. Somehow, she walked away completely unharmed. Nothing happened to her at all. But you can imagine how badly that shook her family. We had broken up once before, then got back together about a month later. That's really where everything started to feel different. Whenever I was back at my house, I kept hearing things. Little sounds at first, movements, knocks. That feeling that someone is nearby, even though you know the house is empty. I tried not to feed into it too much, because once you start thinking that way, your mind can run wild. But then one Tuesday, I was in the kitchen making pizza for both of us. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a mug slide across the table. Not fall, not tip over, slide. Then it dropped and smashed on the floor. At first, I told myself maybe it had been sitting too close to the edge. Maybe I imagined the movement. But deep down, I knew what I saw. That mug moved across the table by itself. After a while, we'd had enough of my place, so we went to sleep at her parents' house. They were away on vacation, so the house was empty. I had a friend with me too, and at some point she called me from upstairs, sounding scared, asking if I had knocked on her window. Her window was on the first floor. I was downstairs. I ran up with my friend and checked everything. The rooms, the windows, outside as much as we could see. Nothing. No one there. Nothing out of place. Later that same night, we went to bed upstairs. Her bedroom door had this old Romanian-style glass panel in it. It wasn't clear glass, more like a dim, frosted kind of window. You couldn't see details through it, but if someone stood behind it, you'd be able to make out their shape. It was around 4 in the morning. I was just about to fall asleep when she suddenly screamed my name. I looked up, and behind that door, I saw a bright beam of light forming out of nowhere. It was there for maybe 1 or 2 seconds, then it disappeared. I froze. My whole body went cold. Fast forward to this year. My ex and I broke up last October, and since January, I've been with my current girlfriend, who is also from Romania. I brought her to my family home, and she's always been sensitive to strange things. She can sense when something feels off. The second we walked into the house, she got chills all over her body. One night, I was asleep and she was still awake. She told me afterward that she heard something rushing up and down the stairs several times. We were alone in the house. No pets, no one else there. I wish I could say I was shocked, but honestly, part of me just thought, yeah, that sounds about right. Things like that had happened before. Then another night, we heard heavy footsteps above us, coming from the attic. Not little creaks, not the normal sounds of an old house settling. These were heavy, deliberate steps. Then we heard something rush down the stairs. I jumped out of bed and chased after it, but there was nothing there. That one really scared me. Those footsteps were too loud, too solid, too real. We decided to leave for a while and drive around, just to clear our heads. Near the front door, there's this large glass painting that reflects things almost like a mirror, just darker and blurrier. Right after you enter the house, the stairs are on the left. I went to close the front door, and in the reflection of that glass, I saw 2 feet coming down the stairs. Just 2 feet. I didn't wait to see the rest. I slammed the door shut as fast as I could and got out of there. After driving around for a bit, we came back to the house. Every door was open. Every light was on. And in the bathroom, the mirror above the sink had fallen and shattered all over the floor. I remember standing there thinking, what did I do to deserve this? Later, I found out that my ex had apparently done curse work on me while we were still together. I don't know how much of that people will believe, but I know what I lived through. I spoke to a priest, and after that, things became less active. Not completely gone, but less intense. Even now, I still hear things sometimes. I also found old belongings from my ex in my house, things I thought I had already thrown away. And once, on a plate, I found a ring of salt, the kind people use in certain rituals or curses. I have more stories, honestly, but this is one of the ones that still follows me. I need to tell you about my old high school auditorium, because that place was wrong in a way I still don't really know how to explain. Every school has one of those stories, right? Ours was that a maintenance worker had died in the auditorium years before, supposedly up on the catwalk. People said he still haunted the place. I heard it 100 times, but back then, I treated it like background noise. Just another creepy school legend passed around by students who wanted something to whisper about. But I was a theater kid, so I spent a ridiculous amount of time in that auditorium. Rehearsals, tech week, performances, set builds, all of it. And I'll be honest with you, I hated being alone in there. It wasn't just that it was dark or old or echoey. It felt watched. Not in a gentle way either. It felt like something had noticed you and didn't want you there. Most of us felt it too. Nobody really liked being backstage or in the house by themselves. We joked about it, because that's what you do when something scares you and you don't want to admit it does. I told myself it was just nerves. Theater kids, ghost stories, dim lights, dusty curtains. The whole recipe. Then one night, during a show, a few of us were waiting off-stage right for a scene change. We were keeping quiet, mostly whispering and trying not to laugh, just killing time until our cue. I was in the middle of saying something when I felt this heavy, wet, awful stuff hit the top of my head. It was thick. That's the part I remember most. Not like water, more like something cold and sticky had dropped straight down onto me. Everyone around me went silent at once. Their faces changed so fast. One second they were smiling, and the next they were just staring at me, pale and frozen. I reached up because I could feel it running through my hair, down the side of my head, and I remember thinking, what just fell on me? But as I touched it, the feeling started to fade. Not dry, not wipe away. Fade. Within a few seconds, it was like there had never been anything there. My hair didn't feel wet anymore. My hand came away completely clean. I looked at my palm, then at my friends, and asked them what had hit me. Nobody had an answer. They had seen something land on me. They had seen me react. They had seen it start to drip. But before anyone could really understand what it was just gone. A few minutes later, 2 people from the cast came down from the catwalk on the far side of the stage. They looked shaken. They asked if we were okay. When we asked why, they said they had seen a dark shape standing above the spot where we'd been waiting. They described it like a person, but not clearly a person. Just this black figure near the catwalk rail. Then it vanished, like it dropped or slipped downward too fast for them to follow. That was when my stomach really turned. Later on, I looked into the old story, mostly because I wanted to prove to myself it was nonsense. But it wasn't. Someone really had died in that auditorium years earlier. And yes, he had hanged himself from the same catwalk I had been standing under that night. I still don't know what hit me. I don't know if it was some kind of condensation or dust or something normal that happened in the weirdest possible way. But I know what it felt like. I know what my friends saw. And I know that whatever it was disappeared from my hair and my hand like it had never been real in the first place. It has been almost 20 years, and I still think about that auditorium sometimes. I can still picture the curtains, the wings, the empty seats, and that awful feeling of being watched from somewhere above. And the worst part is, that isn't even my only strange story. There was another time, years later, when I helped a friend deal with something that seemed attached to her. I don't even like saying that out loud because it sounds absurd. I want to be the kind of person who says I don't believe in ghosts. But then I remember the catwalk, and I remember the thing that fell on me. And suddenly I'm not so sure. So, my family and a few of our close friends have been traveling through Italy for a little over a week. And honestly, most of the trip was beautiful in that dreamy, postcard kind of way. But there were also a few moments that felt harder to explain. The strangest things happened while we were staying at the Sina Palazzo Sant'Angelo in Venice. It's right on the Grand Canal, and our room looked out toward a quiet little garden area in the back. I tried looking up the history of the building afterward, but I couldn't find much, which somehow made the whole thing feel even more curious. I should say first, my family has had paranormal experiences for years. Not once or twice. A lot. So while these things still scare us, they don't feel completely unfamiliar. It's more like, all right, here we go again. Our room had 2 twin beds pushed together in the main sleeping area, plus a separate sitting space with a couch and another bed. There were 3 of us staying there. On the first night, my sister woke up around 2 in the morning after hearing a loud clattering sound. Then, just a couple minutes later, she heard another one. I didn't hear anything because I sleep with earplugs and an eye mask now. I started doing that because I've become so anxious about waking up to something strange that it was actually messing with my sleep. In the morning, she found that a little framed board had fallen over, so that explained one sound. But she never found anything that could explain the second one. At first, we brushed it off. The next night was harder to ignore. I couldn't sleep, and I had this strong feeling that something was going to happen with my bed. That probably sounds odd, but I've always had a pretty sharp intuition. Sometimes I'll get this strange little warning before something happens, almost like the universe tapping a spoon against a glass. At around 1:20 in the morning, my bed started shaking. Not violently, but clearly. Back and forth for several seconds. My first thought was earthquake. It felt exactly like that. But nobody else felt anything, and later, I couldn't find any report of an earthquake in the area. My sister was still awake in the sitting area, so I asked if she had felt the room move. She said no. I was scared enough that I asked her to come sleep beside me, and because she's tiny, she somehow fit in the space between the two pushed-together beds without falling into the crack, which still makes me laugh a little. I finally fell asleep, but then I woke up again around 5:30 because the bed was shaking a second time. The really weird part is that it happened again the following night. My mom suggested that maybe because Venice is a port city, there could have been equipment or boats nearby causing vibrations. And I do think that's possible. I'm not trying to make everything spooky just for the sake of it. But what bothered me was that only my bed moved. My sister was lying between the beds, which should have made the whole thing more stable. And no one else felt it, even when it was strong enough to wake me up. And the thing is, we've had bed-shaking experiences in my family before. Those were much more intense, and one even involved someone feeling like they were being grabbed. So this felt familiar in a way I didn't love. Then there was the jewelry. I have this old vintage watch, probably from the 1920s, that I bring with me everywhere. It's one of my favorite things. Earlier in the trip, when we were staying near Lake Garda, I noticed it was showing the exact correct time, which was strange because I've never adjusted it, and we had crossed time zones. Maybe that was just coincidence, but it caught my attention. One evening before dinner, I couldn't find it anywhere. I had two very small jewelry cases with me, and I checked both of them over and over. I'm very particular about where I put things, so I knew it wasn't there. I had this feeling that it had been taken, so I said out loud, "Please just put it back when you're done." Then I zipped the cases shut and went to dinner. When I came back a few hours later, I opened the pink case, and there it was, sitting right among my necklaces. That may sound unbelievable, but jewelry being moved around has happened in my family before. Necklaces will be tangled beyond recognition, and then later, they'll be perfectly arranged again. So I wasn't even as panicked as I probably should have been. In Venice, it happened again, but with different jewelry. My mom left a necklace on the bathroom counter one night. In the morning, it had been moved into a little hotel box with part of the chain hanging out. She thought one of us had done it as a joke, mostly because of what had happened the night before with my friend Caitlin's necklace. Caitlin is also very careful with her belongings. She lays her jewelry out in straight lines so she knows exactly where everything is. She has this necklace with a coin pendant, and the coin is an actual piece of treasure from the Nuestra Señora de Atocha shipwreck, which sank in the 1600s. That night, my sister and I went to my parents' room for a few minutes, and Caitlin went back to our room alone. Maybe 3 minutes after we said goodnight, she FaceTimed me, completely shaken. Her necklace had been moved into this very deliberate-looking position, not tossed, not slid around casually. Placed. I looked it up afterward, and as far as I could tell, the Atocha never came through Venice. But still, a real treasure coin from the 1600s sitting in an old Venetian hotel room? I could imagine that catching the attention of something. Then came the makeup incidents. At Lake Garda, my mom woke up one morning and found one of her lipstick tubes taken apart on the carpet. Nothing was cracked, nothing was broken, but one of the pieces would have had to be pulled out with force. It didn't look like something that just fell and popped open, especially on carpet. In Venice, my sister was getting ready and using one of those blushes with a clear top and a long outer tube. She picked it up, checked the color, and walked over to the mirror. Before she even opened it all the way, she could see through the clear top that the blush itself was missing. I heard her say, "Where is my blush?" Caitlin walked over to look, and then there was a clatter. Caitlin said, "That just fell out of nowhere." What had happened was that as my sister opened the tube fully, the blush fell out of her robe sleeve. There were blush marks inside the sleeve, so yes, technically, it had somehow gotten in there. But none of us saw how. My sister had just picked it up from the table. Caitlin swears it looked like it dropped out of thin air. So, I don't know. Some of it could maybe be explained. Some of it probably can't. But the whole stay had this odd, electric feeling to it, like the room was quietly paying attention. We also had a much more intense experience at the Doge's palace, but that's a story for another time. For now, I'll just say this. If you're ever in Venice and you're looking for a hotel that feels beautiful, elegant, and maybe just lightly haunted, that one definitely qualifies. Hey, let me tell you about this one time back in high school, early 90s. I was doing all sorts of odd jobs, not your typical fast food gigs like my buddies, but stuff like working at an auto shop, helping out with flooring, and even some construction and demolition. I always liked working with my hands, and honestly, I made more money doing that than my friends did flipping burgers after school. One weekend, I got dropped off at this empty old house for a demolition job. Usually, we worked on commercial places at night, bars, restaurants, that kind of thing. But this was different. It was a Saturday morning job, and it was a house out in the middle of nowhere. Just tumbleweeds outside, and the place looked like it hadn't seen much change since the 60s. My job was to gut everything. Take out the flooring, cabinets, tile, sinks, toilets, you name it. But leave the drywall and doors. I brought a cooler with drinks and lunch, expecting to finish by late afternoon when my ride would pick me up. I started in the kitchen, but there was no electricity, which sucked because my radio's battery was almost dead. As I looked around, I couldn't shake this weird feeling, like the house itself was heavy with history, like someone had lived there forever without ever updating a thing. Then, suddenly, I felt completely drained, like all my energy just vanished. Next thing I know, I'm sitting in a back room, the radio faintly playing in the kitchen, and hours have slipped away. When I snapped out of it, it was evening. I was disoriented, wondering where the day had gone. I stumbled outside into silence. No sounds, no light, just the empty air. I gathered my stuff, locked up, and waited for my ride. I got a bit of a scolding later, but since I was paid for the work I did and not the time, it wasn't a big deal. I refused to go back, and a couple of guys came later to finish the job. Just to clear things up, I wasn't on drugs or anything. I've always steered clear of that, especially after seeing my older brother struggle. There was no gas or anything that could have knocked me out. Normally, I had the kind of energy to tear through a job like that all day. But that house? It just sucked the life right out of me and knocked me out cold. I don't usually crash like that on a job site, especially one that creeped me out so much. I must have been about 9 or 10 when this happened. Definitely still young enough that everything felt a bit bigger than it probably was. My family had just moved house, but we hadn't gone far. We stayed in the same village in central Scotland, though it's more of a town now. The house we moved into was on one of the oldest streets there, and I remember it having this strange, heavy feeling from the beginning, even before anything happened. It was a bungalow, but not a small one. There was a massive driveway out front with a tall black gate you had to open before you could get in. You could probably fit 4 cars in there easily, maybe even 5. As a kid, it felt enormous. Out the back, the garden was much smaller. There wasn't much grass, mostly paving slabs, and there was this little summer house tucked away. I also remember a big old tree standing there, almost too big for the space, like it had been there long before the house had. Inside, there were 3 bedrooms. One was at the front of the house, and the other 2 were at the back. I'm sure the front bedroom had been added on later as an extension. There were 2 bathrooms too, and one of them was unusually large, as if it had once been a bedroom before someone changed it. The living room was huge, half carpet and half old wooden floor. The kitchen was small, and from there you went into a hallway that led down to the bedrooms and bathrooms at the rear of the house. For the first few months, everything was quiet. We settled in, unpacked, got used to the place. Nothing really stood out. Then little things started happening. My parents began hearing footsteps in the hallway at night. Not vague creaks or pipes knocking, actual footsteps, moving up and down outside their bedroom. My brother and I started hearing tapping on our bedroom window. We would look out straight away, but there was never anyone there. Then we began hearing the television in the living room turning on by itself. The bedrooms were quite far from the living room, but we could hear it clearly, loud too, almost full volume. Every time someone went to check, the room was empty. The room at the front of the house became what we called the games room. That was where we kept our toys and consoles. But that room was always freezing. Not just a little chilly, properly cold. No matter what anyone did, we could never get heat into it. My parents had heating engineers come out more than once, but nobody could fix it. In the end, we had to use electric fan heaters whenever we wanted to spend time in there. Because everyone in the house had experienced something, my parents eventually told us the truth. The previous owners, who had moved away to South Africa, had warned them that strange things happened in the house. They had even had the place blessed because they couldn't cope with it anymore. Later on, we did a bit of digging and found out that the street had supposedly been built over the site of an old monastery, where monks had lived centuries before. I've always wondered whether the extensions and renovations disturbed something that had been quiet for years. Of course, whether you believe that or not is entirely up to you. I've kept this story close for a long time, and honestly, I never really knew how to talk about it without sounding like I was trying to convince somebody of something. I'm not here to do that. I'm just telling you what happened, the way I remember it. This was in early June of 2016, somewhere in central Louisiana. My friend Miles and I had come off the interstate and were driving south toward Alexandria. I'm pretty sure we were on or near Highway 167, somewhere around the Wynn Parish and Grant Parish area. It was that strange time of evening when the light is almost gone, but not completely. The sky still had a little color in it, but the road ahead was already turning dark. We turned onto this quiet country road, the kind with pine trees pressed up close on both sides. No houses nearby, no streetlights, no other headlights behind us or coming toward us. Just us, the road, and the trees. And then we saw it. There was a figure in the road ahead of us. It looked human in shape, but it was completely black. Not like a person wearing dark clothes, not like a shadow cast by something. It was solid black, almost like the light around it didn't touch it. It moved slowly from the center of the road toward the trees. Not running, not stumbling, just walking, steady and calm, until it disappeared into the woods. I remember sitting there frozen, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Miles was driving, and after a few seconds he said something that made my stomach drop. He told me there had been a dead deer right beside it. I hadn't even noticed the deer. I was so locked onto that figure that everything else vanished from my mind. But he saw both, the figure and the deer. We didn't know what to say after that. There are moments where your brain reaches for a normal explanation and comes back empty-handed. That was one of those moments. Later that same night, we got into a wreck. It was bad. Miles wasn't wearing his seatbelt and he was thrown from the car. By all common sense, he should not have survived that. But somehow, he did. We both ended up in the hospital. And there's one part of that night that still stays with me more than anything else. While I was lying there in the hospital, drifting somewhere between awake and asleep, I heard Miles's voice clear as day. It sounded like he was right there in the room with me. He said, "Please pray for me. Pray that my spirit makes it to heaven." I opened my eyes. He wasn't there. I asked about him later, and they told me he was down the hall. There was no way I could have heard him from where I was. After that, I found out he had been in a coma. He lived. We both did. And I'm grateful for that every day. But I've never been able to shake the feeling that what we saw on that road was some kind of warning. The black figure, the dead deer, the silence around it all. It felt like something was standing between what had already happened and what was about to happen. I also believe that when Miles was unconscious, maybe closer to the other side than either of us understood, some part of him reached out. And somehow, I heard him. I know how that sounds. I really do. But we were both there. We both saw something that night. And what came after made it impossible for me to dismiss. So I'm sharing this now because I still wonder if anyone else has seen something like that. A black figure crossing a lonely road. A bad accident or tragedy happening soon after. Or the voice of someone who was unconscious, somehow reaching you when they couldn't have spoken out loud. 2 people saw it. 2 people survived that night. And neither one of us has ever forgotten it. Hey, I want to share this weird thing that happened when I was home alone recently. So I decided to take a day off work to catch up on some chores around the house. One of the errands was swapping out our old cable gear and DSL router for new ones, and then setting everything up. Now, my house is a bit of a mix. The upstairs is the original part, built way back in the early 1950s with those creaky wooden floors. Then there's the downstairs, which is a newer addition from around the early 2000s, built on concrete with carpet. The difference matters because you can really hear footsteps upstairs, like someone walking around in shoes, but downstairs it's muffled and quiet because of the carpet and concrete foundation. So it was early afternoon, and I was down in the far corner of the downstairs part, lying on the floor trying to figure out the cables to install the new router. Suddenly I heard this loud running noise coming from upstairs, the older part of the house. It was so clear, like someone was sprinting across the wooden floors. But here's the thing, no one else was home. My wife was at work, my son was at school, and every door and window has sensors that chime if they open or close, and I didn't hear any chimes. I jumped up and tried to listen carefully, then went upstairs to check every room, bedrooms, kitchen, bathrooms, even checked the front door, which was locked tight. There was no way anyone could have gotten in or out without me hearing it. I honestly don't know what I heard, but it was definitely footsteps running all over the upstairs area. It left me feeling pretty unsettled because it made no sense at all. I was around 6 years old when my family moved away from the city and settled in this very remote little town tucked into the hills. It was the kind of place where everything felt older than it looked. The whole area had once been coal country, with mining camps scattered all over it back in the early and mid-1900s. A lot of the houses still standing there had been around for a long, long time, and honestly, I always had this feeling that some of them carried more history than anyone wanted to talk about. The house we moved into was beautiful though, truly. The house itself had so much character, and the land around it was quiet and green and peaceful. At first, I loved it. It felt like an adventure, almost like we had stepped into another time. But then one night, I remember lying in bed and feeling wrong. Not sick exactly, just deeply uneasy. It felt like I was being watched. I looked toward the hallway, and that was when I saw it. There was this very dark figure standing at the far end of the hall. At first, I thought maybe it was my dad, or maybe my brother Jared, but the longer I looked, the more I knew it wasn't either of them. It was too tall, too still. It didn't feel like a person. I pulled the covers over my head and prayed as hard as a little kid can pray until I finally fell asleep. After that, it kept happening. Some nights, I would wake up or just suddenly feel that same awful pressure in the room, and there he would be. At first, he stayed at the end of the hallway. Then, over time, he started getting closer, a little closer each time. Eventually, he made it all the way to my bedroom door. And then one night, he was at the foot of my bed. Sometimes, he would just stand there. Other times, I swear he would sit down near my feet. I can still remember the weight of that fear, how frozen I felt, how badly I wanted to scream but couldn't. I shared a room with my sister, and I started begging her to let me sleep with the door closed. I was convinced he couldn't come in if the door was shut. I don't know why that mattered, but it did. When the door was closed, he stayed away. My sister hated sleeping with the door closed, so it turned into this constant argument between us. Eventually, my mom got involved because I was so upset about it every night. For a while, I think everyone thought I was just scared, or having nightmares, or making something out of shadows. But then other people in the house started having experiences too. My mom told us that one night, while she was praying before bed, she suddenly felt heavy breathing right behind her neck. She said it wasn't just scary. She could feel anger coming from it. Real hostility. Like whatever was there hated us being in that house. My brothers saw the shadow too. Not just once either. Eventually, it all got brought up to my dad. He was skeptical at first. He thought everyone was overreacting, and I think part of him wanted to prove there was nothing there. So one night, he actually challenged it. He told it to show itself to him. And it did. After that, he didn't laugh about it anymore. There was something else in that house too, or at least something connected to it. I started having awful nightmares about this old woman. She was frightening in a way I still have trouble explaining. She would laugh at me in this sharp, wild way, and I would wake up terrified. For a long time, I thought the woman was only in my dreams. Then I found out my dad had seen her too. He was the only other person in my family who dreamed about her, but everyone saw the shadow. We finally moved out of that house, and for years I tried not to think about it too much. Then, nearly 20 years later, one of my brothers ended up working with a couple who had bought that same house. When they found out he had lived there as a kid, they immediately asked him if we had ever seen anything strange while we were there. They had seen the shadow too. And the man said he had dreams about a terrifying old woman. That part still chills me. I don't know what was in that house. I don't know why it seemed so angry, or why it felt so focused on me when I was little. Maybe because I was the youngest. Maybe because I was the easiest to scare. All I know is that it felt real. It felt intelligent. And it felt cruel. When I tell people this story, I know some of them think I'm exaggerating, or that I was just a child with an overactive imagination. I understand why it sounds that way. Unless you've had something happen that you truly cannot explain, it probably does sound like a horror movie. But I know what I saw. And I know we weren't the only ones who saw it. Hey, I want to share a story from when I was a kid that still gives me chills to this day. It's about something I saw in an old, mostly abandoned high-rise building where my friend and I used to hang out. This happened nearly 2 decades ago, back when I was about 10 years old, living in southern China. My friend, let's call him Leo, lived in this gray, run-down tower that was half empty and honestly pretty spooky. Most floors were dark and deserted, with peeling paint and a damp, musty smell. kind of like mold and old paint mixed together. The only light came from a small opening at the top floor, casting a faint glow down the stairwells and hallways. Leo's apartment was near the top, maybe the 20th floor, and we'd usually take the elevator because climbing the stairs was exhausting and, frankly, creepy. One evening, after playing video games, Leo suggested we watch this new Pokemon movie, something with Latias and Latios, if I remember correctly. We went down to grab a copy from a street vendor that sold pirated DVDs, since that was the norm back then. On our way back, the sky was getting dark, and as we stepped into the elevator, Leo mentioned how the elevator had been acting weird lately. It made creaking noises, sometimes ignoring the button presses, and just generally felt sluggish. And then, halfway up, it just stopped. The lights went out, and we were plunged into darkness, stuck inside this tiny metal box. No cell phones back then, so we just yelled for help, hoping someone would hear us. Then Leo suddenly tapped my shoulder and pointed up. I looked through the vent above us into the elevator shaft, and there it was. This thing. It looked like a strange mix between a mandrill and an old woman. It had sharp, intimidating eyes, a bald head with some scraggly hair on the sides, a long nose, and these eerie stripes under its eyes. It just stared down at us silently, like it was watching us, hunting us. We froze for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. Then pure panic set in. I think that was my first panic attack. We screamed and pounded on the buttons and doors, but it just kept watching. I tried not to look at it, hoping it would disappear, but every time I glanced up, it was still there. We were trapped for what felt like forever, maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and honestly, I was so scared I lost control of myself. Eventually, we heard someone shouting from outside, and the power flickered back on. The elevator started moving again, and when the lights came back, that terrifying creature was gone. Back in Leo's apartment, I was a total mess, and his mom helped me clean up. We tried to watch the movie to calm down, but I couldn't focus. Leo mentioned he often heard strange noises in the abandoned floors at night, scratches and rummaging sounds, but they never really thought much of it. After that day, I refused to go back there and made him come to my place instead. I didn't have the best toys, but at least there was no creepy mandrill woman hybrid lurking in my elevator shaft, waiting to eat my soul. Hey, I want to share a little story from when I was really young, like around 3 or 4 years old. Back then, I lived in this cozy double-wide trailer on a small piece of land on Vancouver Island, Canada. It was a quiet little town where you had to take a ferry just to get to the mainland. The property was owned by someone else who also lived there, but their house was a good distance from ours. I don't remember a ton about the place because I was so little, but I do remember we had 2 greenhouses and a big garden where my mom and I spent lots of time. She especially loved growing these purple lettuce heads and rainbow carrots, which were kind of magical to me. Now, my mom often tells me about this imaginary friend I had called the Crimson Man. I honestly don't know why I picked that name, because I don't really remember what he looked like, just this red silhouette of a tall man. At first, my mom thought he was just a figment of my little imagination, which made sense since kids do have vivid imaginations. The Crimson Man and I would have tea parties, build forts, color, and just do all the fun kid stuff together. One day, my mom told me that the Crimson Man wasn't real and was just my imaginary friend. Later that day, she was out in the garden pulling weeds when she suddenly felt a shove on her back and fell over. She thought it was my dad messing around, but when she turned around, no one was there, and my dad was inside on the couch. When she was telling him about it, I walked in and told her it wasn't Dad, it was the Crimson Man. He was upset that she said he wasn't real. After that, the Crimson Man and I kept having our tea parties like nothing happened. A few months later, we were invited to the property owner's house for some reason. While we were there, I noticed a photo of a man hanging on the wall. I stopped and pointed at it, saying, "Mommy, that's the Crimson Man." She asked why, and I just repeated that it was him. Years later, my mom told me that the man in the photo was actually the owner's brother, who used to live in our double wide before we moved in. He died in a plane crash a year before we arrived. So, in a way, my friend wasn't just imaginary after all. Hey, I want to share something pretty personal that I lived through as a kid. So, when I was about 7, my family moved to this old house way out in the countryside. It was built back in the 60s and sat on about 6 acres of land at the far end of what I like to call our little dirt road neighborhood. Just a handful of houses, 6 in total, really quiet and a bit isolated. Our house was second to last down the road, and honestly, only a couple of those houses were actually lived in when we moved there. At first, I was thrilled. I dreamed about having all sorts of animals, cats, dogs, chickens, even goats, and we eventually did get them. But after about a month, I decided to explore the woods near the old chicken coop my stepdad was fixing up. The moment I stepped near those trees, it just felt off, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't know it then, but that was just the beginning. Within the first 6 months, I begged my parents to get curtains for my room because I constantly felt like something was watching me through the window facing the woods. It made me scared to the point of tears until they finally put up the curtains, which helped a little. As the years passed, I became more certain that something wasn't right about that house or the land around it. There were spots I just knew to avoid. I'd have these terrifying dreams, what I think now was sleep paralysis, but back then, I just thought they were creepy nightmares. One night stands out in particular. I had a night terror where shadows filled the room, all yelling at once in a language I couldn't understand. I screamed for my parents until I lost my voice, but no one came. That night haunted me for a long time. There was also a crawl space behind my closet with noises coming from it sometimes. And the feeling of a presence in my room and the one next door was constant. Some nights, I couldn't stand being in that room and had to sleep with my parents or on the living room couch. I heard strange noises at night, kind of like coyotes but distorted and wrong. And honestly, I have my suspicions about what they really were, but that's a story for another time. The scariest part for me was always the attic. I never went near it because something terrible lurked there. I never saw or heard it directly, thankfully. But just being near the attic door made me feel sick and terrified. Even the animals wouldn't go near it. Eventually, my parents divorced, and my mom and I left that house. I'm really glad we did. I heard from my mom's ex-husband that things got worse after we left, but that's his story to tell, not mine. For the longest time, I just thought I was an anxious kid imagining things. But recently, I talked to that man again, and I've never heard him sound so scared. Even my mom, who doesn't believe in the paranormal, experienced things there. Looking back, that house and those years were a mix of childhood innocence and deep, unsettling fear. It shaped me in ways I'm still trying to understand. I want to start by saying that, until this happened, I really didn't believe in anything paranormal. A little while ago, I made a post about how my coworkers always called our workplace haunted, and how I was apparently the only person there who had never seen or heard anything strange. I ended up deleting that post because I realized I had included too many details about where I work. But not long after that, something happened during my shift that genuinely scared me. And now I keep wondering if somehow talking about it stirred something up. I know that sounds dramatic. I would have rolled my eyes at myself a few days ago. I work at a small local business inside a very old building. The place has been around for ages, and from what I've been told, at least a couple of people have died there over the years. My coworkers have always said the building has a bad feeling to it, but I honestly thought that was just because the place is old, worn down, and badly maintained. Scary-looking buildings can create scary feelings, you know? I always assumed the strange stories were probably exaggerations, or people being tired, or hearing things late at night. We work late shifts, and when you're exhausted, your brain can become its own little haunted house. But today was my first closing shift of the summer, and I was closing with my manager, Marcus. He was sweeping the front area while I went to clean the bathrooms in the back of the building. That's when the first strange thing happened. When I walked into the bathroom, both faucets were running. Not dripping, running. That immediately bothered me because the building was already closed to customers, and I had used that bathroom earlier myself. I know I didn't leave the water on. I definitely didn't turn on both sinks. These aren't automatic faucets either. You have to physically twist the knobs for the water to come on. So I turned them off and tried to brush it aside, even though I already felt uneasy. Then I went into the stall area to sweep. The stalls have real wooden doors, not those thin public bathroom doors with gaps everywhere. When nobody is using them, they usually sit slightly open. I opened the first stall and started sweeping. And then, the door to the stall right beside me was suddenly pulled shut from the inside. Hard. Not gently, not like it drifted closed. It was pulled. And the part I can't stop replaying is the handle. I saw it move. It tilted downward, exactly the way it would if someone had grabbed it from inside the stall and yanked the door shut. I froze. Those doors don't just close on their own. You either have to pull them shut from inside, or you'd have to fling them open really hard from the outside and let them slam back. There was nobody in the hallway. Nobody had walked past me. Nobody could have gotten in without me seeing them. The door didn't lock, which somehow made it feel even worse. If it had been a person in there, why wouldn't they lock it? And there shouldn't have been any customers left anyway. We checked the cameras afterward. Everyone had left. Marcus was still at the front the entire time. There are no vents back there, no air conditioning in that part of the building. Nothing that could have made a draft strong enough to do that. It's also at the end of a dead-end hallway, so nobody could have slipped by unseen. The cameras cover the entrances and exits, and they showed only me and Marcus still inside. The feeling that came over me was awful. It wasn't just being startled. It was this deep, heavy dread, like my whole body knew something was wrong before my brain could catch up. I had to stop and breathe because I honestly thought I might either faint or throw up. My first thought was that maybe someone had somehow hidden inside the building. There are unhoused people around the area sometimes, so my mind immediately went to the possibility that someone had snuck in to use the bathroom. Marcus and I searched the entire place after that. We checked every room, every corner, even the roof hatch. Nothing. No one was there. I don't think of myself as spiritually sensitive or anything like that. I've never wanted to be open to this kind of thing. I grew up Catholic, so anything possibly paranormal already makes me anxious in a way I can't fully explain. But this fear felt different from normal fear. It felt sharp and wrong and very, very personal. Now I feel completely unsettled. I don't want to interact with ghosts. I don't want to invite anything in. I don't know how to tell whether something like this is harmless, angry, or something worse. And honestly, I don't want to find out. Part of me is seriously considering quitting because I cannot explain what happened, and I don't want this to become the start of more experiences. So I guess what I'm asking is this: how do I close myself off from whatever that was? How do I make sure I don't attract it, acknowledge it, or bring anything home with me, because I'm genuinely worried about attachments, and I really, really don't want this door to stay open. When I was little, probably from about 3 until I was 10, I lived in this small 2-bedroom apartment with my parents and my younger brother. And I have memories from back then that I would call paranormal. But honestly, when it comes to the really early stuff, I can't say for sure if it was real, or if it was just my imagination, or maybe dreams that felt too vivid. But the things that happened when I was around 8 to 10 years old, those, I know, were real. I was awake. I remember them clearly. The scariest thing happened when I was in 3rd grade. I must have been around 8. My parents fought a lot back then, and it wasn't unusual for my father to get arrested. Sometimes it was because of things at home, sometimes because of other trouble he got himself into. He was the kind of man who always seemed to drag chaos behind him. That day, my parents had been arguing again. A couple of hours later, my dad left, and I remember hearing that he had tried to steal alcohol from somewhere nearby. Not long after, the police came to our apartment and told my mother he had been arrested outside the complex. So I want to make this very clear. My father was not inside the apartment that night. He was in jail. The rest of the day went on like normal. My brother and I played, we ate, and eventually we went to bed. At some point during the night, I woke up to the sound of feet dragging down the hallway toward our bathroom. And at first, I wasn't scared, because that sound was familiar. My dad used our bathroom almost every night. My mom was very particular about her own space, so he usually came through the hall and used the bathroom near our room. I heard the slow, dragging footsteps. Then I heard the bathroom door open. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw what looked like the bathroom light turning on. Then the door closed, and I heard the sound of someone using the toilet. I rolled over and looked toward my brother's bed. He was asleep. And then it hit me. My dad wasn't home. He couldn't be in that bathroom. At first, I tried to explain it away. I thought maybe my mom had come down the hall and used our bathroom for some reason. So I slowly sat up and looked toward the hallway. But the bathroom light wasn't on. The door was closed. And this awful feeling came over me, like my whole body knew something was wrong before my mind could catch up. Then, the bathroom door opened. What came out didn't look like a normal person. It was just this black shape, almost like a person, but without arms or feet. Its head wasn't facing me at first. It stepped out, or moved out, whatever you want to call it, and then I saw its head begin to turn in my direction. That was enough for me. I threw the blanket over my head, squeezed my eyes shut, and tried to stay as still as possible. I wanted to wake my brother up, but I was too scared to even turn toward him. I just lay there, facing the wall, hoping whatever it was would go away. Then I heard tapping. It was coming from my headboard. Just slow little taps behind me. I started praying under the covers. I didn't move. I didn't look. I just kept praying until the tapping finally stopped. The second it went quiet, I jumped out of bed and ran to my brother. I woke him up and made him help me build a little fort on the floor, because there was no way I was sleeping in that bed again that night. I know some people might say it was sleep paralysis, but I really don't believe that. I could move. I was aware. I was awake the whole time. That apartment was haunted. I'm sure of it. And it wasn't just me either. My parents had their own experiences there too. We still talk about those stories now, and the strange part is, we never really got any answers. A part of me still wants to go back one day and see the place again. Maybe even ask the people living there now if they've ever experienced anything. Because honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that apartment still remembers. Hey, I want to share something really personal with you about the strange and unsettling experiences I've had over the years. It all started back when I was living in this old farmhouse with my family. My parents, my younger brother, and I, we all saw and felt things that just didn't make sense. My dad was working those tough, rotating shifts as a new cop, so my mom was often alone with us kids at night. At first, it was small stuff. Picture frames swinging like someone brushed past them, lights flickering on and off, footsteps upstairs when no one was supposed to be there, and even our dog getting trapped in rooms for no reason. One night, when my little brother Benny was about 3, we had a truly scary moment. Mom and I were watching TV when we heard whispering through his baby monitor, followed by a loud shriek and banging. We rushed to his room and found the rocking chair rocking by an open window, the door wide open, and the lights on. But Benny was fast asleep, completely unaware. Mom looked terrified, and honestly, I was shaken too. After that, I started having terrible night terrors, waking up screaming and sleepwalking while talking to someone named Sally in my closet. My parents even saw objects move around me and heard voices talking back to me, in a voice that wasn't mine. The scariest was the day we came back from groceries. It was winter, fresh snow everywhere, and we'd been out for about an hour, enough snow to cover our footprints. Dad had locked everything up tight, including windows that were even nailed and painted shut. But when we got home, every window was wide open, music blaring from the stereo, the front door off its hinges, and all the lights on. Dad checked carefully. No footprints anywhere, no signs of anyone ever being inside. Some windows had been ripped open, splintering the wood so badly, we all agreed no human could have done that. That was the last straw. We moved. But I always felt like whatever was there followed me through the next 5 homes. Our next place was a tiny city home. Nothing too scary at first, just lights clicking, the dog barking at empty corners, and Dad's keys mysteriously ending up in the crawl space beneath the house, a place I was terrified of. But after a few years, when Mom got really sick, the activity got worse. Pictures smashed, scratches on the crawl space door, shadow figures lurking just at the edges of our vision. One time, while I was in the bath, I felt a hand push me under the water. Dad came rushing in and swears he saw a ghostly hand holding me down. After my brother was pushed down the stairs, we moved again. Then came the house my parents bought without ever seeing it first. A big 5-level place with 2 basements. I only lived there for 3 years, but it was intense. One time, I was home alone with my dog Charlie. I heard him growling and snarling like I'd never heard before. I called my dad, begging him to come home because I thought someone was inside. He told me to run to the neighbors, but I had to dash past the basement first. That's when I saw a shadowy figure standing in front of Charlie. Both of us ran out to safety. Dad came with his gun. No one was there. A few days later, I moved out for university, and since then, my parents haven't had any strange experiences. In college, I lived in a shared apartment with 4 roommates. We all experienced weird things. Voices in the vents, alarms going off at 3 a.m. even when unplugged, shadows moving through the house. One roommate's boyfriend ran out scared and never came back. Our landlord even thought there was someone illegally living in the attic because she saw a figure staring out the window, but the attic was always locked. The worst was when all 5 of us heard laughter from the vents. The fridge door flew open, and the kettle switched on all at once. We didn't sleep inside that night. Later, I moved into my own apartments. The first one was okay, just lights flickering and noises. Then I found black mold and had to move to another unit. Now in this new place, I feel a constant heaviness, like something mean is watching me, wanting me to fail. During Zoom calls, coworkers ask who else is there, because they see someone walking behind me. Clients hear voices I don't hear. My boyfriend has caught me talking to someone in my sleep. One night, while I was cooking, a disembodied voice yelled at him to, "Get out!" and a plant was thrown at his head. He refuses to stay at my place and tries to limit the time I spend at his. After a friend cleansed my apartment, things calmed for a few days. But then, I heard scratching from the kitchen wall leading to my closet. I checked. Nothing there. The scratching got louder, and one night, I felt something crawling up my bed. I saw imprints left behind, freaked out, and slept on the couch. My coworkers and clients still report seeing and hearing things during calls. The final straw was when I stayed at my boyfriend's. Around 3 a.m., he sat up talking to something in the hallway, telling it to leave, saying, "He's here for you." When I asked in the morning, he said it was just a dream, but I know better. So here I am, sharing this with you because I feel like something is attached to me, something I can't shake. It's been with me through every move, every home, every moment. And honestly, I don't know what to do next, but I'm hoping sharing this helps me feel less alone. Hey, I want to share something really strange that's been happening to me. It all started slowly, with weird noises, scratching, banging, footsteps in my hallway. A few weeks after trying to clear the place of bad energy, my boyfriend and I were getting pictures taken by my folks. When we looked at the photos later, my dad noticed this shadowy figure of a man in the background of one. Oddly enough, that photo and some others mysteriously vanished from their camera. Things got worse. One night, I was literally dragged out of bed by my feet. My boyfriend was also being scratched and touched by something unseen in my apartment. Then, one evening when he was over, we heard scratching at the front door. We stopped and listened closely. There was a man muttering on the other side. We could hear the lock jingling and the door handle rattling. My boyfriend peeked through the peephole and saw this scruffy, homeless-looking guy fiddling with the lock. We called the police because he had a knife and a screwdriver. But when the cops arrived, the man was gone. They took us to the apartment complex office to check the security footage. What we saw was chilling. I wish I had recorded it. On the tape, the man steps off the elevator, holding weapons in both hands. He stares at my door for 10 minutes, tilting his head as if listening. Then, he starts scratching the door with what looks like a knife. What's even creepier? 2 officers come off the elevator and walk right past him as if he's invisible. They swear the man wasn't standing there when they arrived. And while we were talking to the police with the door open, the man brushed past all of us and went inside my apartment. None of us saw him standing there or entering. The footage clearly shows him, but we saw nothing. After that, both the cops and my boyfriend were terrified. The police called backup to search the building and checked my apartment but found nothing. The only proof was the video and the scratches on my door. The cops just told me to move out. I've never seen scared officers like that before, and I hope I never do again. I'm planning to move in a few months because of the notice period. Since then, the strange stuff hasn't stopped. I keep hearing and catching glimpses out of the corner of my eye. No matter how much incense I burn or how much I pray, the fear doesn't go away. My lights blow out every day. Devices glitch and make weird sounds, and neighbors say they hear me screaming even when I'm not home. I've started working from the office again, and guess what? Weird things happen there too. My coworker and I were on a conference call with management when the weirdest thing happened. We heard noises. The tea kettle kept turning on and off by itself. Lights flickered, and the managers kept asking who else was with us. They were upset because only 2 people are allowed in the office due to COVID rules. We insisted there was no one else there, not even a janitor. One of the managers even got a picture showing a tall man standing behind us. I'll try to share that photo later, but it keeps getting deleted mysteriously. Thankfully, she has an iPhone and can recover deleted photos, but every time she looks at it, her phone glitches and shuts off. It's been quite the ordeal, and honestly, it's still terrifying. I just wanted to share because maybe someone out there has experienced something similar or has advice on what to do next. My girlfriend and I used to have this little routine where we drive up to the Donner Ridge pullout, maybe 25 or 30 minutes north of Truckee, park there, and just wander straight into the woods. We'd done it a bunch of times. It wasn't some official trail thing, really. We just liked the quiet out there. The trees, the cold air, that feeling like the whole world had gone soft around the edges. But I'll be honest with you, those woods always felt a little strange. We'd both heard things out there before. Not animals exactly, more like voices, but with no person attached to them. A few times, we heard these low calls or strange vocal sounds coming from somewhere deeper in the forest. We'd stop, look at each other, and both of us would have that same expression, like, "You heard that too, right?" There were also these heavy impacts sometimes, big, distant thuds, the kind of sound that makes you picture something massive dropping from a tree or someone slamming a log against the ground. We never found a source for any of it, and once or twice we saw little lights between the trees, round, faint, almost like pale orbs. They were gone so quickly that I'm still willing to say they were probably headlights, reflections, bugs, anything ordinary. I don't want to dress up every weird thing as supernatural, but this one night, something happened that I still don't know how to explain. This was in early March, just after sunset. There was still a little blue-gray light hanging in the forest, enough to see shapes and trunks and patches of snow, but it was fading fast. We both had flashlights, and we both had handheld radios. For reasons that seem incredibly stupid now, I suggested we play hide and seek. I know, in the woods, at dusk, not my brightest moment. But I've always loved hide and seek, and I had this inflated idea that I was good at it. Not exactly action movie stealth, but in my own head, I was basically a discount forest ninja. So I went and hid. I ended up lying flat under a low pine tree, tucked into the needles and shadows. My girlfriend Mira was out there looking for me with her flashlight. Since it was getting darker, I didn't want her wandering too far. The plan was that if she started moving away from me, I'd use the radio and give her a hint, just enough to guide her back in my direction. While I was lying there under that tree, I saw her stop suddenly. She swung her flashlight around really fast, like something had startled her. Then she froze and aimed the beam at one particular tree. She just stood there, staring at it. I was maybe 30 yards behind her, watching this happen from the ground. At first, I thought she was just trying to catch me moving. So, naturally, because I'm an idiot, I decided to mess with her. I pressed the button on the radio and, in this ridiculous, creepy horror movie voice, I said, "I'm behind you." But she didn't turn around. That was the first moment where I felt a little uneasy. Normally, she would have spun around immediately, probably told me to shut up, and then come after me. But she stayed locked on that tree, like she hadn't even processed what I'd said, or like whatever she was looking at mattered more. So I tried to guide her toward me. I told her over the radio to slowly turn in a circle with her fictional out. My idea was that once the beam passed over my hiding spot, I'd tell her to stop and walk toward me. Simple enough. Except I completely messed it up. I saw her light sweep through the trees, thought it was aimed at me, and told her, "Stop, walk that way." But somehow, from my weird angle under the pine branches, I had pointed her in the exact wrong direction. Instead of sending her toward me, I sent her toward the parking area. So now I'm still lying there in the darkening forest, under this tree, and she's walking away from me. After a minute or two, I couldn't see her flashlight anymore. That's when I started getting nervous. I reached for the radio, about to call her, and before I could say anything, her voice came through. She sounded quiet. Not panicked exactly, but tight, like she was trying very hard to stay calm. She said, "Can you come out now? I'm getting really freaked out." I remember thinking, okay, fair. Dark woods, weird game, probably time to stop. Then she added, "I don't want to explain it out here. Can we just go back to the car?" That changed the entire feeling of the night. I got up right away and started heading toward her. We found each other near the edge of the trees, and she looked genuinely shaken. And Mira is not someone who scares easily. She's skeptical about pretty much everything. Ghost stories, cryptids, paranormal stuff, all of it. She's the kind of person who will look for the boring explanation first, second, and third. But that night, she was pale. She kept looking behind me while we walked. When we got back to the car, she finally told me what had happened. She said that when I saw her whip her flashlight around and focus on that tree, it was because she had seen a black figure run between two trees directly in front of her. Not a shadow drifting, not a branch moving. A figure. She said it crossed from one tree to another and disappeared behind the trunk she was staring at. And right when she was trying to understand what she'd just seen, that was when my voice came through the radio saying, "I'm behind you." So in her mind, she thought the figure had been me. She thought I had somehow sprinted across in front of her, ducked behind the tree, and then used the radio to creep her out. That already scared her, but she was still trying to convince herself it was just me messing around. Then, after I accidentally guided her toward the parking lot, she stopped near some bushes because she heard someone whispering from behind them. And she thought it was me again. She said it sounded close, low, like someone was trying to get her attention without speaking fully out loud. The problem is, I wasn't near those bushes. I wasn't near the parking lot. I was still way back in the trees, lying under a pine, completely unaware that I had sent her off in the wrong direction. Depending on where she was at that moment, I was anywhere from 30 to over 100 yards away from her. So whatever she saw run between those trees, and whatever she heard whispering near the lot, it wasn't me. We sat in the car for a while after that without saying much. The heater was running, our flashlights were in the cup holders, and the forest outside the windshield looked completely still. That was probably the worst part. Nothing was happening anymore. No footsteps, no voices, no strange lights. Just trees standing there like they knew something we didn't. We still go back sometimes, but never after sunset. Not anymore.